Good evening. I'd like to call the meeting to order and welcome you to the regular meeting of the Milwaukee Planning Commission. Agendas and additional copies of staff reports are available on the table in the hall. If you have not picked up an agenda, please do so. It contains important information about the process. If you wish to be included in the mailing list for a decision, please add your name and contact information to the sign-up list located on the table in the hallway. If you wish to testify, please also fill out a yellow comment card. We will follow the basic format listed on the back of the agenda. It includes all of the hearing procedure steps. We may vary from the process based on the specific circumstance of each hearing. Next on the agenda is minutes, but I don't recall getting minutes, actually. Were there minutes in our?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so we don't have minutes, but we do have informational items.
The informational item I want to bring up is, again, and I think you've been told about this, the housing forum that we've scheduled. And Chair Travis, you're very aware of this since I think you've been charged with being moderator, if I'm not mistaken. So, yeah, I know that Chair Travis is going to be there, but I certainly hope that the other commissioners can attend, partly because the follow-up commission meeting in December, on December 11th, is going to be an opportunity to talk about what we heard at the December 5th forum.
December 6th.
December 6th forum, thank you. So the forum's on December 6th, but there's going to be very little opportunity for discussion by either the council or planning commission or the advisory committee. So we're going to have a joint meeting with council and the comp plan advisory committee just to talk generally about housing related issues, and we will also present some information about the neighborhood hub project that we've been doing. So that'll be a larger work session December 11th. So we've got a couple of key meetings there that are coming up. So those were the main things I wanted to make sure you were aware of.
And will there be a hearing also that night on December 11th? No hearing, just a work session. Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you. Audience participation. This is an opportunity to comment on items not on tonight's agenda. If you wish to comment on an item that is on the agenda, there will be time for comments after the presentation. Does anyone wish to comment on an item that is not on tonight's agenda? Okay. The next agenda item is a public hearing on... Sorry.
If it's okay, let's change the order of the agenda right now and go down to the comprehensive plan component.
Okay.
Which I know that David would have made a presentation. I had suggested to David that maybe we punt this particular element to the next meeting on November 27th and focus then on some of the comprehensive plan policies that are being presented to the CPAC. So what he was going to ask today was, are there elements or are there issues that you wanted to make sure were raised as policy issues? So as we are crafting this set of policies related to Willamette Greenway, related to natural hazards, and our other two topics, which are suddenly eluding me. Are there things?
Parks and Rec,
and
resiliency,
and climate change.
Climate change.
And energy. So those, if there are items that you had that you really wanted to make sure that we addressed, that was his question for you tonight. And I thought perhaps we could try to get that in right now.
Okay, skip ahead to the work session. Okay.
The DLC members that want to attend for the City Hall hearing can get here.
Okay, so we can open that up. And then also, I think Commissioner Edge did submit some written comments, so if we may want to reference those or talk through some of those as well. in general, as Denny asks, does anyone have any particular items to highlight other than what we may want to discuss with Commissioner Edge?
I do. And so I'll use language that everybody will be happy to hear. That the most important tool in your toolbox is information. And so what I found at the last meeting, that there was probably the most influential voice in the room was, and this is not about squelching anybody's opinion, everybody's allowed to have their opinion, but the other side doesn't seem to be presented, that they were talking about, the evils of development and how they're only rich guys and how they don't care. And I think that there needs to be the counterpoint to that maybe an educational piece on how expensive development is, the risks that they're taking, really actually the simple economics of housing, that it's, supply and demand simply based, and that so that everybody has an understanding that how hard it is actually to do development, how they're bound by the rules that have already been set forth, and what risks that they take, just so that that other side gets a chance to speak their voice, just so that the most influential, the worst thing that you want to do is create a bunch of rules that may be counterintuitive to what the group is trying to do. And I think the more information that they have, the better off that they could be, and hear both sides of the argument.
Is this your reaction to the small group discussions?
Yes, to the small group discussion.
Okay.
And I think part of what the group was discussing was, profit-motivated developers that may, they make decisions in line with their profit margin, not necessarily with, the values of the city in mind, right? So I think that was the tenor of the discussion was, how do we...
That was some of it. The other of it was that the developers and home builders are restricted to the rules that are put in front of them. And that part of this comp plan process is to reissue those rules. It's also on the onus of the city governance to change those rules if they don't deem that those rules are appropriate. And so I think that if they get the other side of the story, where, hey, look, yeah, they run a business, but they take a huge amount of risk, and that a lot of regulation means a lot more dollars, which may limit the amount of private development that you have. And I think that story needs to be told, or at least addressed.
I can appreciate that comment, but I do think that the group overall recognizes that there are, trade-offs when you set policies. And in particular, we were talking about, adding costs to housing and how that, doesn't get us where we want, which is to have more housing, but yet we want it to be green and have all of these elements that meet our values. So, in fairness, there was acknowledgement that there are trade-offs, but I think the point about just having a little bit more education around the business side of things, I think would be helpful. And at one point, I thought we did have business represented on the group.
We do, but it's limited. Let's say that. It wasn't limited on purpose, but it was limited in that Neil Hankerson, thank you, from Dark Horse is on the committee, but we haven't seen him for a couple of meetings. And maybe we need to give him a call, see if he can.
And maybe a specific ask, would be to say, okay, so we've got these things that we're grappling with, and it would be helpful to hear your perspective and to specifically ask for that.
Yeah.
Would be helpful for him.
On the housing side, which we are about to explore. There are a couple different areas in which we're working. I mean, one, and there'll be a lot of discussion about equity-related housing policy at this forum. There will also be some information related to housing cost and its impacts. But what I wanted to talk about for a moment was the cottage cluster study that's being done right now. Its focus has been on finding a housing form that it has a very strong focus on the cost per unit, and how to create some development patterns that would help bring housing costs down. So I think when we have all these parts kind of coming in from different directions, there's certainly a conflict when they all come together, and part of the challenge is going to be to sort all this out and come up with some good answers, good solutions. And hopefully it's not at the synthesis stage of the comp plan, which is the last 6 months. Hopefully it's while we're working up this stuff during the housing piece, because I think it's going to be too hard to kind of sort all the priorities in the last couple months of the project. So it's on the horizon. I think we've got that discussion. That's not, and I think we have to then take that and apply it backwards to the economic policies that we've already worked on.
Right.
So we've already pinned those down, but there may be some things that we need to look at again after we consider the housing piece and the natural resource piece and the hazards piece.
I mean, I think there are some, some natural things that kind of flow between topics, and, whether that's transportation, which is forthcoming down the road, housing, thinking about climate change and the green building and those costs and things, that we might be able to just pull out a few of those key concepts that are threads and impact the other policies. Not everything is something that will impact another goal, but I think it could be a good exercise to now at this stage try to pull some of those things out, so we're not waiting till the end to say, oh, this goal, related to climate change impacts transportation, and then we deal with that later, to kind of upfront be looking at a few things. And that also helps us practice that exercise of kind of going in between goals and looking at that. So I think that would be a good suggestion to start kind of doing some of that.
We're trying to do that as we do our work, but it's not, some we miss stuff. That's why we go through this entire process, so that everybody can contribute and make the product better. And one more response to Commissioner Hemer's comment is that our community development director and our development manager are both very aware of impacts on development cost, and so we are sort of constantly in discussion about that in the office. So it's an interesting process. Yeah. So you can. So we try not to do anything without that awareness. Anyway.
But I just think a simple education, because not everybody in that room knows that, that are like us, that we sit through these hearings and we look at the rules, and that, that there are basic rules that these developers have to go by, and then beyond that, what a risky business development really is in the long run, and the risks that they take as a private developer, and even, even a a nonprofit. I mean, they have to live within the guidelines of what their dollar amounts are, and it not penciling is a real term. And so.
Denny, did you say at the housing forum there you guys had invited some developers to speak, or was that, am I thinking about something else?
It's, all I said was that I was hoping there would be some information about housing cost as well.
Okay.
So.
Okay. I must be thinking of something else.
You're thinking of the dinner that council discussed earlier?
No, I
Okay.
just heard of that today, but no, we had talked about something, but I can't remember what it was.
Okay. Commissioner Edge, thank you for your thorough suggestions that you have submitted. I mean, this is pretty lengthy and comprehensive. Is there anything that you wanted to highlight from all of the different, I mean, you sort of go through and address topic by topic, which is helpful.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. What I really wanted to focus on and what I kind of considered to be a common thread through all of the 4 policy areas as I was going through is wanting to make sure that we're looking at all of these potential policies through, or how to satisfy our goals, but we're looking at these through the lens of the super actions, including specifically super action 1, which is make Milwaukee a model of resiliency, environmental stewardship, and disaster preparedness. And that may be somewhat implicit when you're looking at natural hazards and you're thinking, or Parks and Rec, or whatever. But it tended to be. It seems to me that a lot of the references to Super Action 1 have been really limited to the energy and climate change section. And so I really want everybody, staff and the CPAC and really everybody that looks, over the policies that come through. How are we making the city a model for these different things that's called for in Super Action 1 across the entire breadth of policy areas? And I know that we're, certainly looking that way again in the energy and climate change section, but I think that there's some additional measures, that we could consider, with respect to the natural hazards. Some of my suggestions there, specifically the FEMA National Flood Insurance Program has the community rating system program. And I think that, we should look at exploiting that and, not exploiting may not be the right word, but leveraging the opportunity that presents to participants, ratepayers, flood insurance ratepayers within the city, and how that ultimately benefits, a lot of other areas, policy areas that the city would be concerned about, including, obviously natural hazards, but climate change, water quality. Open space, parks, sufficient parks needs met for, citizens and everything. And so I think that there's, if we really look at how, are these policies we're proposing, are these making the city a model for these things? Needs to be a question that we ask of every single policy that flows, through for consideration. Is it really satisfying this super action? Is this really far enough to say that we are a model in these respects? And I think that we should strive to be that. And that's what the participants in the visioning process really called for. And I think it's appropriate. I think we have a great opportunity here to dream big and to reach for it. And I think that, without kind of getting into the weeds on all of these different policy areas, which I would be thrilled to do, but knowing we have a limited time, I'd just like to shine the spotlight on the Super Action 1 and really make sure that everything gets looked at through that lens.
Thank you. Yeah. I think that, we spend time thinking about what other cities have done, and okay, so City X has done a comp plan update recently. What do they have if, related to this policy? So we look at other cities, and we don't want to just copy and paste. Because I think, we need to push the envelope and rise up a little bit, not just meet the requirements by state law and borrow from other cities, although that is informational and helpful as we think about these things, but to also try to push ourselves a little broader sounds like your recommendation to the group. So, thanks. Anybody else have anything at this point? There's plenty of time
And
to also.
if you have anything else,
Yeah.
you can email David and me, and we'll make sure we address it.
And the next meeting for CPAC is December 3rd.
Right.
Yes.
We've got hey, it's the holiday season, and we thought, let's have a bunch of meetings. Well, to tell you the truth, we tried to do the housing forum in early November. It should have been done already, and it just didn't come together. We couldn't make it happen. So we're doing what we can do.
You guys reading your Color of Law book?
I read it.
You read it?
I read it,
Yes.
yes.
All right, okay. Gold star, okay. Okay, but so, if there are things in between now and December 3rd, when we have the next CPAC, if you need some more time to digest some of this information, don't hesitate to reach out to me or Denny and David with additional thoughts or ideas, because this December 3rd meeting is our final block meeting for this. Am I right?
I think.
Is there one more?
I think you're going to get one more in
Okay.
January before the council We're hoping the council would pin down that set of policies in mid-January.
Okay.
We're falling behind a tiny bit. Not
Okay.
too bad.
Okay.
But so that would give the CPAC one more chance to look at those policies.
Okay.
And again, we have an option for the commission, and I think it's probably a good one, is to look at the draft policies in 2 weeks. We're writing them now.
On the 27th?
On the 27th.
Okay.
Because if everything goes, there may be some development applications that are coming up. As I said, that with the council, that Rusk Road project, Bonaventure, could get submitted this week, which would make it, it could end up before the commission in January. The other thing that's probably going to be before the commission at the first meeting in January is the transportation management plan for the ball fields. And I know that one's going to have a lot of testimony. So I think if we can free up, that would have been your last chance as a commission to look at
Okay.
the policies before
Okay.
it goes to the council. So if we can get that front-loaded, we'll be better off.
I see what you're saying. Okay. Because we're going to be really busy with hearings-related
Yeah.
activities. Okay. So the 27th. All right. So between now and then, you will be getting the draft policies.
Yeah, next week.
Next week. Okay. Great. All right. Is there anything else comp plan related, or we feel satisfied with that? Okay. All right. So going back to hearings, so remind me that City Hall is a type 3? It's a type 3? Type 3, okay, thank you. All right, so now we'll go back to the public hearing portion of the meeting. And so the public hearing on City Hall Council Chambers remodel is called to order. The purpose of this hearing is to consider application number HR-2018-001. The purpose of the application is to request a historic review on property located at 10722 Southeast Main Street. The applicant has the burden of proving that the application is consistent with the City of Milwaukee's zoning, subdivision ordinance, comprehensive plan, and any applicable municipal code provision. The applicant has the burden of proving that the proposal conforms with all of the city's applicable criteria. I now ask staff to cite the zoning ordinance sections where the criteria can be found.
Section 19.304, downtown zones, 19.403, historic preservation overlay, 19.904, community service use, 19.907, downtown design review, and 19.1006, type 3 review.
All testimony and evidence must be directed toward the applicable substantive criteria. Failure to address a criterion or raise an issue with sufficient detail to allow the Planning Commission an adequate opportunity to respond to each issue precludes appeal to the City Council based on that issue. Failure to raise constitutional or other issues related to the proposed conditions of approval with sufficient detail to allow a response precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Any party with standing may appeal the decision of the Planning Commission to City Council. Persons with standing are those who submit written comments or testify in person or sign the Planning Commission attendance sign-up sheet in the hallway. Excuse me, I will recognize those persons who have completed the testimony cards and given them to me. When you come to the podium, please state your name and address for the record so they may be entered into the minutes. If you're here to testify, please remember to confine your remarks to the application and the relevant criteria and to avoid repetition and irrelevant information. If additional documents or evidence are provided by any party, the Commission may, if requested, allow a continuance or leave the record open to allow the parties a reasonable opportunity to respond. Any such continuance or extension shall be subject to the limitations of the 120-day rule unless the continuance or extension is requested or agreed to by the applicant. We'd have to go through conflicts of interest again with this. We'd go through, okay. Thank you. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to abstain from this hearing?
No.
Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to declare an actual or potential conflict of interest?
No.
Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to report on any ex parte contacts? No.
Yes, and as I did at the last hearing, I will summarize it for you all. Basically, I sent out an email as per Climate Plan, page 58, to reduce the amount of paper that is used, that an electronic device be put into the seat of each pulpit.
Thank you for summarizing that.
I was in attendance at the most recent and did not come back into the room until after the applicant had left.
Great, thank you. Does anyone have any rebuttal to the ex parte contacts declared by the commissioners? Will any commissioner who has visited the site prior to this hearing please raise their hand? Did any of those commissioners who visit the site speak to anyone at the site or note anything different from what is indicated in the staff report for this application? No. Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the participation of any member of the Planning Commission? Okay. Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission to hear this matter? All right, let's proceed to the staff report presentation.
All right. Good evening. Vera Coles, Associate Planner. Here to present the continuation of this hearing. Just a reminder that the overview of this project, again, is that the current council chambers that we're sitting in right now are proposed to be relocated downstairs to the fire bay. So the project involves remodeling the fire bay to accommodate those changes, including, so it will be used as a civic space, meeting space, as well as court hearings. The proposed work requires historic resources review, as this is a historic building, community service use review for the changes to the use of the building, and downtown design review. The project involves an addition of an accessible entrance at the rear of the building to the parking area, replacing the existing roll-up doors with new roll-up doors, replacing the existing wood windows in the fire bay with new fiberglass clad windows are the preferred approach, and we'll get to that in a second. Replacing the existing swing door on the south facade of the building with a new entry door, and providing some new exterior lighting above those swing doors, as well as some signage indicating where the accessible entrances are. A couple of things have come up since our last hearing, and I will start with the ones that don't involve the windows, so that we get those out of the way, and then we can come back to the windows. This is the revised site plan that was included in your packet that was submitted by the applicant. The DLC provided some comments, and I'll get to those in a second as well. But the proposed site plan, what the applicant is showing are 8 bollard locations. There wouldn't be 8 bollards, but there would be spaces for 2 rows of 4 bollards, both at one at the back of sidewalk, at the access curb cut area to where the fire bay is, and then sort of at a midpoint as well. They would be removable bollards so that they could be located either at the sidewalk or at that driveway midpoint, depending on what's happening. Are we using that space as a plaza space? Do we want to kind of keep vehicles completely out of that curb area, that access area, and open up that whole space as a plaza, or midpoint if there was need for city vehicles to be able to pull in and park for quick errands or so on, and then to be able to leave again. So again, depending on what's going on at City Hall, either day-to-day operations or a public event, and the proposal from the applicant's perspective would provide for maximum flexibility in kind of what we're using that front space, therefore, in front of the fire bay. There was also some discussion about where the fire pole would be located. The applicant materials included a couple of different possibilities. In the top picture, one of the options is that the fire pole would be removed from where it is and cut into 2 pieces and vertically attached to the wall, kind of on either side of the large window at the back of the fire bay, and there would be a plaque that would be installed that would kind of explain the history of the building and of its use as a fire station. The other idea was to locate remove the fire pole and basically mount it horizontally onto the wall. Similarly, there would be a plaque that would be describing the history of the building. Both options would have that informational signage. Again, the fire pole is basically kind of right in the middle of the room, and it's inconveniently located for the future use of the space. The DLC had another suggestion for the pole, and we'll get to that when I sort of summarize what the DLC's ideas were. But I wanted to summarize those couple of ideas from the last hearing before we get to the windows.
I don't want to interrupt. Is that inside or outside?
Inside.
Okay.
It would be inside the room.
For the picture, I was thinking it was outside.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, it's in the inside of the room.
All right,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yep. Okay. Onto the windows. So and I need to back up for one moment, because from the plans, the staff's, my understanding of the project was that 3 of the original windows on the south-facing facade were the ones to be replaced, proposed to be replaced. In fact, 7 original windows are being proposed for that. That wasn't not clear to me, and I probably should have, I guess, asked more questions of the applicant. However, so what I've outlined here in red are on the floor plans are on the right are the 3 windows on the south facade. There's the large window that's to the rear of the proposed hearing room. That window is also proposed to be removed and replaced. It is an original window. The ADA accessible door is replacing a window, and that we knew for its location. That's going out to the parking lot. But then the third circle are 2 small windows there at the back of the building. Those are original windows as well, and they are proposed to be replaced as part of this project as well. So in total, there are 7 windows, one of which is going to be that accessible entrance at the rear of the fire bay. and I'll point this out in a second as well, but the windows, other than the 3 on the south-facing facade that we've been talking about the most, the large one and then those 2 small ones, are in very good condition, or are in good condition, evidently. But I'll be getting to that in a second as far as a sort of a revised proposal that we're going to be talking about. So these are the 3 windows circled in red that are on the south facade, and these are the windows that are in very poor condition per the applicant's materials, as far as the wood rot in both the frames themselves as well as the windows. And these are the windows that have been from the outside on that south facade. And these are some of the original windows proposed to be replaced. Again, the findings in the staff report detail the department's recommendation that as far as how the proposal relates to the approval criteria for replacement of windows in historic structures. The applicant, in their revised materials that were included in your packet, also included this elevation that looks further into that fiberglass window option. The applicant did meet with the DLC on November 5th to go over the revised materials and to get their feedback on those revised materials. The fiberglass window option that they were looking at, this shows an updated profile of the original windows. They're on the top. The existing replacement windows that are already here in the building, and then the fiberglass windows to allow for some comparison with the in the building's elevation. The applicant has confirmed with the manufacturer that wood trim can be adhered to the fiberglass window frame without voiding any warranty. So that is something that that is an option as well, and the applicant will be able to explain that in more detail and answer any questions that you have as far as that goes. This drawing shows the 2 original first floor windows and 1 proposed fiberglass window on the first floor. So you'll see in the center there on the bottom the existing original window, and then the proposed fiberglass clad wood window in the elevation too, so you can see the proportions, and some shadowing has been provided so you have a sense of how far back or how they're set in the wall itself. The hope from the applicant's perspective, of course, is that it would convey the minimal difference between the 2 in installation form. Also included in your materials was a spreadsheet that the applicant submitted that details the sizes of the various window components that were provided in sections to you on the original windows, the proposed windows, and the existing replacement windows. There's a column that also made some reference to custom wood windows as an option as well. And what the spreadsheet was intended to identify for you is a cost comparison of both the fiberglass and the custom wood windows, as well as a list of costs that would not have been included, like the expected life of the windows, the maintenance cost per year, et cetera, in an effort to illustrate the cost differentials between the various options. This graphic I handed out to you this evening, so it was waiting for you at your chair. We received this today. One of the recommendations from the DLC was to overlay rather than show side by side those sections of the windows, so that you could see what the original windows, which are outlined in red in section of the various parts, the existing replacement windows that are here in the building, as well as the proposed new windows in black, so you can see where they overlay and where the differences are in the sections. And again, the applicant and the architect are here to be able to answer any questions, and they'll go into more detail about that. But I wanted to explain what that graphic is that was here at your chair. And as staff was talking about kind of how to present some of this material this evening and what some of the options are, there are some options for where this project could go. And so as a way of summarizing some of those, it's a rough comparison of some of the options for the project, and very generally talking about pros and cons or pluses and minuses for each option based on some criteria better energy efficiency as one of the criteria. That's something that the applicant has talked about a lot. Historic value, obviously, these are historic wood windows. The life cycle cost of the window replacement, and then the required maintenance, depending on what option we show or the commission approves for the project going forward. And the three options that we're describing here in this chart are to replace all of the windows with the revised fiberglass fiberglass clad wood windows. Option 2 is to restore those two small and that one large window that's in the fire bay, the ones that are in good condition or in fairly good condition, and replace the rest of them with that fiberglass proposed window. And then finally, to restore all of the original windows, keep them in place, restore all of them, and replace the rest of the building's windows with fiberglass. As we recall, I think, over time, the windows in this building are going to need to be replaced. And so part of what this decision is that we're hoping is that we'll set the tone for what's going to be happening in the future. But right now, we're talking about those original windows in the fire bay. And so in general, energy efficiency is something that certainly the applicant has talked about a lot. And the fiberglass clad windows are higher energy efficiency quotient than the original windows do, even with the storm windows that could be adhered. So that's the plus for that one. Historic value, that's a minus. They're replacement windows. As good as they look, obviously the original windows would have a higher historic value. So we applied a minus to that one. Life cycle costs for fiberglass as well as the required maintenance get a plus because it's less, right? They have their less cost over time, and their life cycle and their required maintenance would be less. So that would be a positive for that option. Sort of the plus minus for the option 2 is that you get some of that energy efficiency with the fiberglass windows, but you lose a little bit with the original windows. So we're just sort of cutting it kind of in the middle as far as it's sort of a plus minus depending on that some are replaced and some are restored. Similarly, across the board for historic value, we would be retaining some of the original windows, but not all of them. The life cycle cost, again, for the fiberglass windows is less, but for the ones that we would be restoring or that would be restored, would have more of a life cycle cost and more ongoing maintenance. So that's why it's not a wash. I don't mean to make it mathematical like that, but there's pluses and minuses to both. And then as far as restoration of all of the original windows, and then moving forward with the fiberglass for any of the other windows, we lose some of that energy efficiency. We do, of course, retain that historic value in those windows. The life cycle cost and the required maintenance would be higher because, again, we're still at those original windows. Although it's not required by the criteria, and we talked about this at the last meeting, the window replacement criteria as far as the historic review does talk about wanting to maintain the original windows, but if the replacement windows are close, then the criteria in the historic review allows that to go forward. It does allow for replacements. However, staff does, at this point, now that we're understanding what the remaining of the original windows there are in that fire bay and so on, we think that it would be a good show of good faith for the city to make an effort to restore those windows. So staff would recommend option 2, to restore the windows that are in good condition that can be restored. They could still, obviously, for the energy efficiency would have the storm windows, but they are in decent condition and can be restored without losing a lot. However, we do believe that because of the condition of the remainder of the original windows, the ones that are in such poor condition, that the new fiberglass wood option would make sense. So staff's recommendation would be to restore those 3 and replace the other ones. SHPO did review the application at the original set. We did get the letter that was included in your application. That was, or in your packet, that was based on the original materials. And so you read that they wanted the applicant to explore more appropriate replacement windows or repair of the existing windows. That was the preferred option. When we submitted this revised material to SHPO, we did receive response, and you have the email in your packet. They didn't send an official letter. They responded to my email request that although certainly restoration and repair is the preferred option, they did believe that the new proposed replacement window is a better choice than the original proposal.
The fiberglass option.
The fiberglass option, correct, yes. When the further revised materials were submitted, DLC discussed them at their meeting on November 5th, and the chair is here to be able to respond and to discuss that meeting with you after the staff report. The DLC recommended that the applicant do a few things, provide a drawing that would show the original window with the proposed window superimposed, and those were the sections that, in that drawing that was there, in an effort to better illustrate the differences between the windows. The DLC recommended the applicant provide drawings or photographs of the original wood windows with the replacement windows side by side, so that elevation that showed the building with those, with the windows was an effort to address that, those comments. An insulated wood replacement window is the preferred option by the DLC. They would prefer to see a wood window as opposed to the fiberglass clad wood window. DLC recommended that the applicant consult with a contractor from SHPO's list when soliciting cost estimates for repair, rather than going to someone else. SHPO did provide a list of those contractors, so that was one of the recommendations. They did talk about the bollards and their location on the site, and that locating the bollards at the edge of the sidewalk would be preferred to prevent parking at the edge of the sidewalk. So they would have preferred only one location for bollards, and that would be at the edge of, at the back of sidewalk, as opposed to the two locations. And then regarding the fire pole, the DLC recommended that, would ask the applicant consider leaving the fire pole in its existing location, but cut it so that it's not all the way to the floor, and to accommodate the use of the room, but that it remain in that original location, so that it's a visual reminder of where that fire pole was for anyone that's in the room, rather than taking it down and putting it somewhere else. And that the remaining sections could then be displayed, as was proposed by the applicant, in sections or on the wall. And then, of course, the informational plaque that would describe the history of the building. So those are those recommendations. And that's a summary. Lauren is here from the DLC to answer any questions and definitely give you more detail about that as far as that goes. Again, back to the approval criteria, as far as section 19.403. I've just,
Hold on.
I'm going to
Pause for a moment here.
Sorry, I'm a disaster. Thank you.
Someone's jumping out of their chair to
Drop the pen. It's the Santa weight I'm putting on.
Windows are really exciting.
Yes.
The DLC can attest to that, I think, so, yeah. I've circled the criteria for windows because that's really the focus. The findings detail all of the other criteria, but I just wanted to highlight the criteria for windows, that replacements should match original windows as much as possible. So the criteria gives us room to be able to do something other than just restoration of the windows. And our findings, we support replacement of the windows that are in such poor condition that we think that we agree that replacement makes sense, and we think that the criteria supports that finding. Again, your decision-making options are to approve the application with the recommended findings, with modified findings and conditions of approval. Can deny the application, or you can continue the hearing. The 120-day clock runs out in January on this application, so we're not quite at that 120 days quite yet. As I said, the staff recommends kind of an alternate recommendation based on more information that we received, that the commission consider allowing for the restoration of those 3 original windows in the fire bay and replacement of the other 3. And then, of course, the door, the ADA accessible door, would be in that 4th, in that 7th window. We do also recommend that the commission may consider adding a new condition or a statement within the decision that future window replacements in the rest of the building that are not original windows, that are the replacement of the probably replacement windows, that the proposed fiberglass clad wood windows would be, or better, would be the ones going forward, trying to figure out how do we set the stage for future applications. And those can be covered within a type 1 review at the planning director level per the code, if the windows or the replacement materials match the original, which certainly some of these replacement windows don't match anything. So the replacement windows would be a much better fit from the original windows. So we would just ask that maybe you consider kind of setting this up so that future projects can go forward through a type 1 review rather than coming through a planning commission type 3 review every time. And also that we would have consistent materials, replacement materials within the building. And that concludes the staff report. As I said, the chair of the DLC is here as well to present a separate report from the DLC and be able to answer any of your questions.
Any questions for Vera before she goes away?
You bring up the map of the drawing?
This one?
No, of
This.
the layout, the floor layout.
This one.
Where is the fire pole right now? Is it where that little arrow is?
Right here. Oh, sorry, you don't have just a second.
I'm going to add something, though. I don't think the fire pole should be part of the discussion, because the fire pole isn't visible from the outside. It's not part of the criteria on which you'd be looking at this type of use. Okay. So, I mean, I think you could offer a suggestion to the city on what they should do with the fire pole, but I don't think it's something that it's appropriate to condition. So,
I have a question along those same lines. Excuse me. So, in the email from Jason Allen, on November 5th, he has a 1 and a 2, and he says in number 2, the difference in the interior is not ideal, but the exterior conformance to the original is more important in this case. So is that, I mean, what you're saying is, I mean...
I think it's similar, but our criteria are really about the exterior of the building and how it looks. So, again, this is a city project, so we should try to do a really good job on all these things, interior, exterior, whatever we want to do with the fire pole. But so I think the distinction I'm making is what should be a condition and what should be, a suggestion. So that's the, inside, I think it's suggestions. Outside, you get to make that decision.
Criteria, okay.
I had a question regarding your the recommendation to set the stage for future replacement windows. Is the ask that would become a condition or just a suggestion? I'm trying to think how we would craft a condition around.
Well, because, a condition doesn't seem appropriate.
It was guidance. It was sort of guidance more than anything else. So this application, the window discussion became part of the larger review process for the building. If the city were to come back and make a separate application for the windows, replacement of all the windows, that's really a type 2 decision that would be up to the planning director to make the decision. So part of and typically what I would do in that situation is I'd look to the DLC and say, hey, DLC, what do you think I should do? And so I think what we were looking for right now is an opportunity to get this sort of nailed down to some degree, so that we don't have to go through this every time. Now, did we ask that question to DLC directly? No, we did not. So maybe that's a little unfair.
Okay, anything else for staff? Okay. All right. Lauren, would you just come up?
Of course. Yeah.
I think Vera did a great job of summarizing Our findings, just pointing towards the SHPO review and the preference for repair of the existing windows, and then also the suggestion that the DLC made is that the applicant first find more options for replacement. It really seemed as though there were kind of two options they were looking at, and we strongly encourage that they go to the SHPO's list in order to find out what other options are available. Replacement with, repair of the existing windows is the strong preference. If not, then finding an option that is very close to the existing windows would be the second option in terms of the DLC. Otherwise, I think everything is pretty clear here. I think I would say that as the Design and Landmarks Committee, I do think we have, we did feel the need to make the comment about I'm looking at you, Denny, about the fire pole, just as it is a landmark of the city, and the fire pole being one of those primary pieces that indicates that this is the historic use of this building. We felt like that was a proper way to identify it versus, putting it horizontally or oddly cutting it in half and putting it on either side of the window. I'll kind of leave it at that.
Thank you. Any questions for Lauren?
I had a question around the city's new preferred recommendation to keep some of the windows and the ones that can be preserved. Does the DLC have a recommendation or perspective around just the consistency? If we're going to ultimately be replacing every window but 3 with the wood, is it better to have 3 original rather than eventually have a full set of consistently?
No, I think the recommendation would be to restore all windows and not to have a mix of restored versus new fiberglass windows. That just for continuity's sake and preservation, it would be to actually preserve the existing historic windows and then as it is possible to actually bring those windows that are repaired in the future back to their historic design.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Because I know that some of them are not historic windows that still need to be replaced, but bring them back to what they previously were.
Okay.
Am I being clear?
I think I understand the preference. Yeah.
We have 3 of the members on the DLC have a long resume in history and historic preservation, and I'm kind of looking back at Mary, and do I say something? Yeah.
You'll have to come up. Yeah.
Let's do that in stereo.
If you could state your name and address for the record, please.
My name is Mary Neustatter, and I live at 12213 Southeast River Road, Milwaukee. I guess I have a question for Vera. Did anybody ever on that list, those experts on the list that SHPO sent to us, did any of them ever come and look at these windows?
If I may, you'd have to go, the applicant will be able to address that question.
Yeah.
I did not, the applicant, I think. So the applicant will be able to present that.
They're going to give their presentation
Later.
next.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I think when we first started this process, we didn't start at the beginning, and the beginning should be bringing in somebody who absolutely understands historic buildings, because it's a very narrow niche. And early windows are such that anything before World War II, those windows are better than, they're going to last. If they're maintained, they're going to last forever because of the quality of the wood. And the other issue is the windows, the older windows, were put together almost like Tinker Toys. So they were made so you could take parts out and put pieces in and, restore part of it and leave the rest of it. And I've seen windows in the past that you thought could never be, restored, and they were restored. Now, obviously, the point is that some of them just don't. At some point, you've got to draw a line and say it's just not worth it. But I really am concerned, or want to know that we have taken that step to know that these windows really cannot be restored, or if if they can be restored, how much is that going to cost? And is that just so far out we shouldn't even look at it? And I think the other thing is that wasn't mentioned here, but was mentioned in our meeting the other day by one of the other people, was that we have a responsibility here. We are a historic building. The other people are going to be coming to us and asking about their windows. And if we don't, take care of our windows to the best of our ability, if we do have original windows, and if we don't really make an effort to see if we can restore them, then I think we've fallen short. And the other thing is, another comment I'd like to make is in terms of the energy efficiency of windows. I know that one thing that SHPO said when they wrote back to us, they said, well, gee, we looked at the windows, and they via a picture, so I'm sure it's not something that they could really verify for sure, but they said it looks like we could put 2 panes of glass there, or somebody could put 2 panes of glass there, not just one, which would make a difference. And then if you put in storm windows, I really think that you would become very close to the energy efficiency that you're trying to achieve, or even exceed it. So, I mean, if we haven't taken those, those pre-steps, and if they've already done that, fine. But if we haven't, I really think we need to back up and have a real window expert come over and look at them.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you both. So, any other questions for them, or should we have the applicant provide their testimony, and then there's always an opportunity to comment after that as well? Okay, so.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right, so comments from the applicant.
Damian Farwell, Fleet and Facility Supervisor, 4305 Southeast Fieldcrest.
Sorry. Tracy Orvis, DiLoretto Architecture, 200 Northeast 20th Avenue, Portland, Oregon.
And just to maybe start just a little bit out of order, I can respond to Mary's comments, which I really appreciate, and they're fresh. So with regard to, I contacted 6 contractors. I think they were all on the recommended list. I heard back from 3. 2 were willing to bid. I had 2 of them inspect the windows. They said that they could restore them all. Clearly, the ones at the east end, those 3 are in much better condition. Especially the big back window that's about the same size as that one. There's a little bit of glazing issue. The paint's barely broken. I'm a wood enthusiast, and you can't buy wood like that anymore. And as she mentioned, the joinery is amazing. And to have windows like that intact, it's not a problem for maintenance. It's not a problem for longevity. It's not a problem for, we put a coat of paint on them, they redo some of the glazing, that'll last a really long time. They did mention, or was mentioned, putting double glazed windows in the existing original frames. Neither contractor said that was possible. The depth of the window is just insufficient to hold double glazed glass. They did talk briefly about a storm window. There's a company called Indo that does a really good job, apparently, of laser measuring and creating a really good seal. I researched the U value, which is the insulative value, and Indo claims a U value of 0.52 with a single pane plus their storm window. The fiberglass window is like a 0.29, so it's almost double. But again, if you look at those fractions, they're not far off. Like an original window is probably like 1 or 1.5. So the storm window does a lot, but it's not possible to get the insulated sort of sandwich glass in the original frame. The pricing, on the restoration was $15,000 to $20,000 for all 7 windows. And what's a little bit sticky here is that it's a public improvement contract, so I believe we're gonna have to pay BOLI wages, which is prevailing wage. These are small, as Mary mentioned, niche companies. One of them, I'm not positive, is gonna be able to provide BOLI pricing. The other said they could. They haven't provided it. Their initial estimate was based on not BOLI pricing. In my experience, BOLI pricing sometimes is like double. So I don't have a really clear picture of what that pricing looks like right now. To restore the best 3 windows looks more like $3,000 to $5,000 because they're in such good condition. There's no cutting that sill out. I mean, the process is they would remove the sill, they remove all 3 panels, replace them with plywood, take them back to a shop, cut significant portions of that wood out, replace with one of the contractors actually cruises salvage yards for old growth fir to replace with like kind materials, and then bring it back and reinstall it. So being that those 3 are in such good condition, I don't think they'd even have to take them away. They could address them in place. And there was a question about, or there was a comment to pursue other options. So we also looked at an aluminum clad window, but it didn't resemble the original as closely as the fiberglass did. And we provided a sample of an off-the-shelf wood window, which since we've said isn't, even the setback is not close enough. And we, in that spreadsheet, is pricing for the custom version, which would better replicate the original wood window. Are there any other questions along those lines I can answer?
Anybody? Okay, I think we're good on that. Thank you.
Are there any concerns about or questions about the overlay that was provided?
Maybe you can just talk us through that briefly.
Sure. Let's see.
For those of us not familiar with looking at this type of diagram.
Oh, thank you. There we go. Okay, so essentially like that left-hand side, so that's as if you took like a vertical slice through the window, and you're looking at it this way. So the bottom one is the sill condition. So the black is kind of what we're proposing with the fiberglass wood windows. So you can see on that portion, the sill condition is a bit higher, and that's because of the nature of that install. We would put a wood sill. We would still have a wood sill on that that spanned that, and then the fiberglass clad wood window would sit on top of that wood sill. So that does boost that up a little bit higher. But when you compare it with the red, which is the original window, it's still the top of the glazing starts not too much higher than the original window. And then the blue represents kind of these windows that are in this room, and the replacement windows that are currently in the building. You see that they're set farther forward in the window opening than both the original windows and the proposed new. So we're really trying to maintain that original setback as much as possible. And the muntin detail is kind of the little dividers between all the panes. There's actually a decent amount of similarity between the original and the proposed new. The only difference is that with the proposed new, you have double pane glazing. So there's definitely more depth between the two, but the profile is very similar. It doesn't get, sometimes those can get really thick for double glazing, but this one, they offer a pretty narrow profile option that's, I think, within 1/8 of an inch of height from the original. The head condition, you can see, is very similar to the original. We just have a little bit of additional trim on the interior face. Then the overlays on the right-hand side are as if you cut a horizontal slice through the window and are looking down at it. So the mullion condition is where those, basically where two sections of the glass come together. So you can see the replacement, the existing replacements are quite a bit thicker than both the original window and the proposed new. So we're trying to, again, keep that exterior profile of the mullion as similar as we possibly can. And the jam condition with that window, you can also see, again, that the existing replacement is farther forward than both the original and the new proposed. So we want to maintain that shadow line because I think honestly, when you're walking down the street, that's one thing that you definitely notice. And if these new windows are set, closer to the facade, closer to the face of the building, you'll notice that. Like, that's a noticeable change. So keeping that consistent is really a top priority. And then keeping the overall proportions of the windows as close as we possibly can as well. Because again, as you're walking down the street, those are the things that you're going to pick up on right away. So I feel as long as we are able to maintain those as closely as possible, then this will be successful. Does that all make sense?
That helps me. Anybody have any questions about that? No? Okay. Is there anything else that you were going to present to us?
Do you want to talk about the condition of these windows? They said something about them being made of pine and not fir.
Only that modern wood windows don't last, and that's what the restoration folks said too. These windows were installed in 2001, and a number of them are failing on the west side, and there's documentation that they began to fail in like 2008, 2009. And that's both a maintenance issue as well as the original, or the wood it's made out of is essentially inferior. The wood they were milling in, the 30s was old growth, and that's not what anybody makes windows out of anymore. If I could add just a little bit of, remind everyone a little bit of context about the difference between restoring the south-facing windows versus fiberglass replacements. It's they take the hardest beating from the elements. They're south-facing.
Right.
By restoring them, the frame would be left in place, so we would not have the opportunity to address further insulation, flashing, and weather seals behind that. And nor will we get to investigate the condition, because it does appear that there's water infiltration in those sills. But that the east windows, we feel there isn't a downside to restoring and maintaining them, as they're in such good condition that their life cycle cost will be excellent. That's it.
Okay.
Could you clarify why you wouldn't be able to remove the frame and do the exploratory, work if under that situation that you were just describing?
Yeah. So both contractors said that in a standard restoration process, they would remove you can see the three individual windows, take those away and address them. They said that the outside they can't replicate. So, and oftentimes when they remove them, they're partially, if not destroyed. So if we required that of the contractor, I believe what they would do would be to remove them, and if they were partially or destroyed, they would remill new wood to try to match the profile of what they pulled out. But it sounds like it's not a standard part of their process.
Thank you.
And so what we have with the spreadsheet and the costs is, it doesn't have the restoration cost?
No.
No, okay.
So what I have is, I have a verbal quote from one contractor.
Yeah.
A written one from the other contractor. That written quote is $15,000 to $20,000 for all the windows.
Right.
It does not include prevailing
bully,
wage
right,
rates. And that could be
Double,
25 to
perhaps.
100% more.
Right.
One of the contractors said that they didn't believe bully wages applied for shop work, which I hadn't heard before. If that's true, it's probably closer to 25%. If that's not true, it's probably close to 100%.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
Absolutely.
Okay. Any other questions for the applicant? No? Okay.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you. Okay. So do we have any testimony at this point? Okay. I don't have any yellow comment cards, but offering a chance if anyone wanted to speak in support or opposed or neutral. Okay. Does any member of the Planning Commission have any questions regarding testimony to this point?
No.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Vera, can you move up the slide to what the DLC recommended, please?
Did you have a question?
I don't think, I think maybe it's more of a deliberation question.
Okay.
I think.
Okay. All right, so if we have no additional comments, then I will close the public testimony portion of the hearing. The public testimony portion of this hearing on file HR-2018-001 is now closed. Gavel again. Okay. Discussion by commissioners. Are you ready for discussion?
Yes.
Yes. Who's first? Commissioner Edge.
Sure. So the last time, we were hearing testimony, I was thinking a lot about, the costs of maintenance and, the life cycle costs and everything. But we've, as a city, we've chosen this to be a historic landmark, and there's costs associated with that. It's an intentional decision. And so I'm comfortable kind of, with the idea that this, it may cost more to do, work on this building because we have chosen to designate it as a landmark and treat it as such. And so that's an important part of, what I think that we should be considering is that, that this is intentionally a landmark and we should strive to be as original as possible. I realize that our ability to condition specific aspects may be limited because the code does allow for replacement. But in as much as we can, I think that we can reiterate or restate the DLC's recommendation that insulated wood replacement windows are the preferred option. I think that's fine. Other than that, I think the applicant did basically everything on the list that the DLC asked them to do, which I'm grateful for. Also, moving on from the windows, which we may deliberate about some more, but I think that I think we're limited in what we have the ability to condition. Although I'd listen to further commentary about that. I agree with the DLC recommendation that the bollards should be at the edge of the sidewalk and that there's not really any need to facilitate parking in that space. It should be plaza space. There's plenty of parking. I don't see a need to protect that parking space in any real, I mean, if it's really that common that we need parking right there, then there's angle parking spaces that the city could choose to repurpose, or sign for, city vehicle parking only or something to that effect. So I think that our public spaces, are sacred and few, and that they shouldn't be. It shouldn't be, auto parking optional, and that we should celebrate our plazas and make them permanent. I think that'd be a great place for one right there. So.
Do you want removable bollards or permanent bollards?
I think we start with removable bollards, but because it's not proposed as part of this application to do anything else with that plaza space. But certainly, signaling that, our intent. I don't know. I guess I would be open to permanent bollards. I would be open to permanent bollards. I don't see a need to facilitate parking here. So that's fine with me. And then the last thing is with respect to the fire pole, I think that it is within our purview to condition that the fire pole remains somewhere on site with some kind of acknowledgement plaque, whatever, that, some kind of interpretive marker to, explain, what the fire pole is. If that, I agree that we don't necessarily have the ability to condition things inside, but somewhere on site, I think that we do have the ability to condition that, and it just makes sure that the fire pole, is preserved in some capacity, and that there is an the ability for the public to connect with the fire pole and the history of this facility as a fire station, and but also get it out of the way so that it the room can function. And I don't know that we have, maybe we just recommend or restate the recommendation from the DLC that the fire pole be cut. But that part of it remain in its original location, but that the remainder of it be placed somewhere on site. And I think that's all I've got.
Okay.
No, it's just on the site.
I'll go. I'm not probably going to be a super strong voice in this deliberation. This is not an area that I had thought about, thought so much about windows in detail before these two hearings. But I have to say, on the DLC, Mary, I'm sorry I don't remember your last name, but I really, really appreciated your testimony. And that actually was what got me, I don't know, a little bit more excited about the fact that I was learning about windows, just hearing your passion around the pre-World War II wood, and that was the best testimony in these two series of hearings. And it actually, I sat forward and was like, okay, cool. Windows are cool, and there is probably a good reason to save what we've got. I was a little bit confused, I guess, when there is such a hodgepodge of replacements. Why do we care that these ones haven't been replaced yet and now it's their time to be replaced, just like every other window in the building has? But I came around to saying, yeah, all right, we've got a few that are still original and these are probably something special. And, I think I would be okay with just saving the east side ones are in really, really good shape, and the south side ones have, unfortunately not been so well maintained, and that maybe those are too far gone based on the diligence that facilities has done to bring in the contractors and talk about what it would take to replace them. So I'm just not going to be a strong voice in this deliberation, but I'm willing to entertain a motion that would preserve either the east and the south side if that's where the passion is, or just the east side. And that's kind of where I'm at.
Okay.
I'm kind of the same way. I can appreciate the cost savings benefit and the possibility of bully. That can definitely throw a project off. So I guess I'll defer to those who are more passionate and maybe who have a more stronger opinion, like the DLC, it sounds like, has a definite preference to replace all of the windows. I could kind of go either way, just because SHPO recommends that, or allows for replacements that look similar. So I'm kind of in the same boat as Commissioner Burns in that whatever I guess is the majority opinion as far as saving the ones that can be saved and maybe replacing the ones that need replaced.
Okay, so I'm a little confused because I think, if I'm looking at the overlay correctly, that the fiberglass windows actually match better than the wood windows. Right? Am I looking at that correctly?
I think so.
Anybody willing to say yes or no? Okay.
It looks that way to me.
So I'm not sure why the recommendation says that insulated wood replacement windows are the preferred option. That was what my question was, and I'm not. That's where I get I'm a little confused, and maybe it's because the fiberglass windows have changed over the wood, because I believe at the last meeting, the wood windows were the better match. If I remember that right, that they could get at least the profile at least even closer.
I didn't recall that.
You know, I might be crazy. Now, here's the thing. The ballards should be at the sidewalk. They should be removable, and they can be made permanent. We don't need 8 holes in the concrete. We only need 4.
Okay.
And the ballards are in the front. Commissioner Edge makes a very compelling point where he says the city has designated this as a landmark.
Right.
We should treat it as a landmark. And in fact, I am willing to actually help out the city and give the type 2 recommendation that all windows, when they're being replaced, should be restored to pre-World War II conditions. So in other words, that they should look exactly like the original windows should look like. Whether or not they come up with the fiberglass one or not, but they should be handmade wood windows when you go then and go replace it. Because I think Commissioner Edge's testimony is that compelling. I don't know if I necessarily, and so this is the option that the city gave us, the compromise option, which makes a huge amount of sense in my head, right? It's a cost saving, preserves one side, but allows for difference in the other. And that's what I would have gone with, except I think Commissioner Edge has pushed me over the edge, that, you know what? It is a landmark.
Yeah.
And I would, to Commissioner Edge's point that we can't, that we could say something about the fire pole, I think we should make it a recommendation. I think the recommendation should be that the fire pole exists on site with a interpretive sign, and if it cannot, that it be given to a local museum. It could be a fire museum. It could be any museum. But, that way they just don't throw away the pole, since we can't actually condition it in. It seems like there is a strong desire to keep the pole with an interpretive sign. This is the funny thing. I'm cheap, and so I want to go with the least amount of dollars spent. But, Commissioner Edge, I think, has pushed me over the edge. So I would like to see all of those windows restored. And in fact, we can just make it a type 2 decision from here on out, saying that all replacement windows be restored back to their original.
There aren't any
I would
other
ask
original windows.
that we go back to DLC for that, if that's the request. If that's the recommendation.
I guess if we were to do the fiberglass, then we could. but I guess not.
Could I clarify one thing with Denny first?
Yes.
Before we move on? By doing that, by basically giving a recommendation for how the other windows should be replaced in future applications, that doesn't preclude you from seeking the advice of the
true.
DLC.
That's true.
Okay.
I think what we were looking for is, if the windows are replaced, it's a type 2 decision. So it's up to me, and I'm looking for some guidance, and if that's the guidance, that's fine. We can still, the applicant can make whatever decision whatever application the applicant wants to make, and then we can just go back through the process. That's fine. In the end, I don't care. It's not part of the code, okay? So if you make this condition, recommendation, whatever it might be, there's still an ability for Damien and crew to make whatever proposal they want to make.
Yeah. And I still agree that we should make a recommendation if we feel strongly about it as a body, and that I would agree to such a recommendation.
For the non-original windows through the rest of the building?
Yeah, just to give the guidance to future reviews, the future type 2 reviews, at Denny's or the planning director's discretion would, have the advice that this is what we're looking for, and he would still go to the DLC and, get their recommendation.
What the original recommendation from the city is that if you guys replace with the fiberglass, why don't you make that a guidance as the rest of the replacement windows then be this type of fiberglass? So I'm using that same logic, and I am saying, well, if we decide to go with the original wood windows, that we should make that same recommendation to all the other windows.
I think the difference is that there's no other original windows remaining, and so I'm not sure that your logical leap follows there, that if we're going to preserve these wood windows, it doesn't speak to what we do with the other.
Those windows should be restored back to their original form.
But you can't restore them if they're gone.
Right, but they can be made.
Replaced with something similar to what was originally there. I don't think that's the same as restoration and replacement.
Okay, all right, yeah.
So I'm not seeing
however you want to say it.
I guess I would just think a recommendation that future window replacement would be reviewed by the DLC.
Or we can just not recommend anything, and it doesn't change anything.
Right, and I'm looking at the insulated wood replacement windows are the preferred option, and kind of carrying that through to future. I mean, that's replacement windows. We're talking about replacement windows, right?
Right.
So that's what
the future replacement.
I realize that, and I mean I see that. That's right.
So I have a question, because I thought that it was stated that new wood windows do not have a lifespan.
Yeah, I just don't want to get into this.
So modern wood windows are not the same as restoring original wood windows that have the lifespan.
Let me.
Reading trying to bring this forward today. It was sort of like, oh, we're talking about windows. What about this? So it's not. The applicant didn't ask to replace all the rest of the windows in the building yet. And we thought we might get ahead of that by looking for guidance on what that might be. You guys can vote on that if you want, but let's make it a separate vote from the decision
Don't tie it to
before
this.
you.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, all I was going to say about it is, again, just setting the stage for consistency in the future. And, if we want to leave it alone and just let future processes go, that's fine. If we want to issue some guidance because we agree on something, we can find consensus on a recommendation, then I think that would be fine too.
If we're leaning towards restoring the south and the east windows and no new fiberglass replacements, I think we should just not talk about what the replacements might look like, because I don't know if and when an application comes in for these less quality windows, whether they should be fiberglass or wood. It's a whole different, multiple hours that we'll get to learn about more details about windows. And I just don't know. I'm not prepared to say what should happen to these windows. I've been convinced, I think, that the south and the east, with your guys'
I think that's
passion.
That's a legitimate point, and Denny made up the point that, that we'll just let the processes go forward.
Okay, so where are we then?
You still get to say your opinion if you want.
Yeah, I agree. I think Mary's testimony also pointed out that, if the city isn't able to maintain a historic landmark, then expectations for others might precedent or provide room for others to not restore. So that was, I think, important for me to hear as well, that, our standards should be higher, that this is our building and we're making these decisions about it. And I guess, along the same lines of this is a landmark, so the budget, we need to really look at what is the budget needed to maintain this landmark and make sure that the city is adequately budgeting for operations and maintenance of this building.
It's hard not being that we're not a budget board. We're
That's
not
right.
authorizing spending, and I'm kind of thinking to myself, well, I don't know what the budget is for this thing. If they're looking at would this push the city into a do nothing option? Do we care?
The
Did
budget's
DLC
not
care?
part of the criteria.
Yeah, it's not one of our
Budget's not part of the
criteria. Right? It's not
Criteria
part of our
is,
criteria.
does it look similar enough? That's
Right.
the criteria.
There are budget consequences to land use regulations.
Right.
And our purview is the land use regulations. And so that's our focus. But, we can certainly consider, the budgetary implications, but ultimately, it's, we're thinking about land use regulations, and when a landmark is designated, there are budgetary implications to designating a landmark from that point, forward. So it's the city has, spoken. This is a landmark. There are land use regulations around landmarks. That's what we should focus on.
Are we all good with the ballards up front?
I think we're good on that one, yeah.
All right.
So one last question on the bollards. Were we going to let them be removable?
My feeling on go ahead and let them be removable, just in case. One of the things that I worry about is the sculptures and loading up the sculptures into the sculpture garden. I'd hate to put something permanent in there that then blocks them and causes more pain for them to have to get a crane or whatever. I don't know how heavy those things are. They look pretty heavy. These last windstorms hasn't blown them over, so they're probably pretty heavy. But then to allow access in case of, you have a large a piece of furniture that's coming in here that you just can't kind of park somewhere and let's look at it this way, removable ballards, I'm assuming that they're safety enough that you just can't drive over them.
Right.
So that there's enough work to have to remove them. So it will be pretty special kind of event to make them be removed.
Hopefully.
Right, or they just get removed and never get put back, right?
Mm.
But I'm going to trust the city.
Any more deliberation on this? Do we feel ready for a motion?
I think, but I need help to know what finding was the replacement of the, do we have, can I just call that option 3? Isn't option 3 what we're talking about here, just?
Yes.
Without the fiberglass windows, without any reference to the.
Future.
Future, right, we're not doing the
Yeah.
future.
Yeah, no, we scratched that off.
Yep.
Because it made you unhappy, Denny. So I will make a approve application HR 20, and the ballards, and I recommended find it, they are removable and to the front, correct?
4 holes, not 8.
Okay.
4 holes, not 8.
4 holes, not 8, right?
Holes, not 8, yep.
Okay. Approve application HR 2018-001 and recommended findings and conditions approval found in attachments 1 and 2 as option 3 on the windows.
Is that satisfactory for a motion? That works? Vera's shaking her head. Okay. All right.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None?
Chair, if I may, I would like to make 2 recommendations that we move for, that we could recommend. One recommendation is I would like to recommend that the fire pole stay on site with an interpretive sign, and if it cannot be placed inside the building, that it be given to a local museum for display. My second recommendation is that the diocese at least has electrical outlets for those who chose to go paperless, can plug in their electronic device so that they can continue to go paperless and not run out of power. Those are my 2 recommendations.
Okay. Should we discuss those? I guess I don't. My recommendation would be to not remove, the fire pole should stay on site.
That's fine too. If that's what you,
Giving the option of removing it just, I think, dilutes our
That's the recommendation.
recommendation to keep it in place and have interpretive signage, so.
I'm dramatically opposed to having electrical outlets. I'm sorry, Greg. I'm just no.
but they exist now.
I'm kidding.
Okay, good.
And they'll exist on the new one.
They'll exist on the new one.
Well, I would like to make a recommendation just to make sure. Hopefully they put in USB ports, because that'd even be better.
Did our previous motion capture the bollards? Yeah, okay.
It's in there, yeah.
Good.
Okay.
You already voted on that one.
We already voted on
Yeah, I
that
just wanted to
one.
make
That
sure.
one I didn't gavel down, but that passed. Okay.
So I'm willing to change my recommendation to say that the fire pole stay on site in the interior of the building with an interpretive sign.
Signage.
And electrical outlets and cup holders. Was that the?
I don't even need cup holders. Just electrical outlets. What I'm trying to do is what we heard earlier from our city councilors is implement plans and goals that they have already set forth. And I'm using Climate Action Plan, page 58, to try to implement some of those going forward.
All right. Do we need to discuss that, or are we okay with?
I'm a motion to accept Commissioner Hemer's recommendation for
Okay.
outlets and fire poles on site
Okay.
as a recommendation.
Second.
All those in favor? Okay, great. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right. Recommendations from us to you. Okay.
And thank you, DLC and
Yeah,
the
thank you.
applicant for all the hard work. We appreciate it.
Learned a lot in that. Learned good stuff there.
Can take 2 minutes.
Okay, so moving right along.
Can we have a 2-minute break?
2-minute break.
Yeah.
Okay. Back
Better
in 2
turn
minutes.
off my personal electronic device.
No more than 2 minutes. Good.
And this dinner sounds interesting.
Now we're off there.
Now that we're off.
Right. Oh, wait, never back on.
Oh, shoot.
All right. You guys took longer than 2 minutes, but
Sorry.
just saying. All right, so let's reconvene and move on to our next hearing, and that is a type 5. Thank you. Okay. The public hearing on file ZA-2018-004 is now called to order. The purpose of this hearing is to consider legislative amendments to the Housekeeping 2018 Code Amendment Round 2. I will recognize those persons who have completed the testimony cards and given them to me. When you come to the podium, please state your name and address for the record so they may be entered into the minutes. If you are here to testify, please remember to confine your remarks to the application and the relevant criteria and to avoid repetition and irrelevant information. Planning Commissioner participation. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to declare an actual or potential conflict of interest?
No.
No. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to abstain?
No.
Let's proceed to the staff report presentation.
Good evening, Vera Colles, Associate Planner. All right. This is the next round of what we're calling housekeeping amendments. However, while many of these proposed code amendments are what we would call housekeeping amendments, clarifications, tweaks, minor corrections, and many of those are not intended to affect the meaning or intent of the regulations. This current package does include both those simple housekeeping amendments, but they do include some that involve more significant changes that do include some changes in policy. Several of the proposed changes have been held over from the last round of housekeeping amendments as well, so they may have looked familiar to you when you reviewed them. The process so far, we did have a work session with the Planning Commission. We had 2 work sessions with City Council. We provided notification to the NDA, to all of the NDAs. We posted a code commentary with the code amendments with our 30-day notice, and we did provide a Measure 56 notice to property owners in the downtown mixed-use zone, the general mixed-use zone, and the North Milwaukee industrial area relative to the green building standards that we'll be discussing. All right. The next slides go over and summarize the proposed amendments. I leave it to you, Chair, how if people have questions as we go, I'm happy to answer. Either way works for me. So
Let's do it as we go, if that's fine with you.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yep, that's fine. Okay. The proposed language for Title 11 miscellaneous permits creates a process for review and approval of temporary uses such as, for example, parking for construction projects, seasonal sales, boat rentals in Milwaukee Bay Park. This type of permit does not currently exist in the code. Right now, we do things as special event permits, which makes it work, but it's not really the appropriate process. So we've created language that would create that new process for temporary permits.
I'm sorry, does this also then apply to like block parties and stuff?
Block parties would probably be, actually would be special events.
Okay.
So that would be different. Yeah.
Okay.
For Title 12 streets, the proposed language allows for a modification to the access spacing standards for driveways and intersections. Rather than requiring a Type 3 variance for that kind of thing, the Guardian Development, the Axle Tree project, required a Type 3 variance for their driveway access into their parking garage because it's a mid-block driveway and it needed a Type 3 variance for that. What we're proposing is that the modification process that's already outlined in Title 12 gives the city engineer, the engineering director, the authority through that process to modify a standard based on engineering principles. Rather than having a mid-block driveway go through a variance process, we're proposing that a modification process that already exists in Title 12 be applied to such a scenario as well. There are several proposals for amendments to the sign code, to Title 14. We did talk about these during the work session as well. I'll just go over them briefly. The amendments to Title 14 would disallow banner-type signs as permanent signs, as a wall sign, in order to require higher quality permanent signage. Banners would be allowed as temporary signs, of course, but not as their permanent sign. Right now, we don't have any kind of a standard for what that permanent wall sign would be. And as it relates to temporary signs, the proposed language includes a 6-month time limit for temporary signs. Signage that would be applied to a construction site through our temporary uses standard would not apply. That's a temporary use, and those signs would be part of that temporary use permit, so that we're not kind of doing a couple of different things at the same time. There's no time limit currently for temporary signs, so we're proposing a 6-month time limit. It was suggested to look at what some other communities do. Not every community does temporary signs, but I did look at Wilsonville has a fairly involved process in trying to determine what is a temporary sign, and they allow them for 60 days. So they have a very short time frame, which I believe when we first brought this code package up, 3 months was suggested. And there was some concern both from members of the Planning Commission as well as the City Council that maybe that's not long enough, and maybe we should be a little more lenient with temporary signs. So we're at the 6-month.
So Vera, this 6-month timeline doesn't apply to construction signage?
Correct. If it's part of a, for a construction project, temporary use permit would typically be used for the construction trailer and so on. So for a temporary use under that umbrella of a permit, then no, the construction signage would be part of that temporary use permit, not as part of the sign code.
Okay.
Yeah.
So does this mean a banner in one place? So let's say I had a banner on the upper half of my wall, and 5 months later, I move my banner down to the lower half of the wall. Does that mean that I have removed the old banner and I get a new 6 months?
Is that for the same temporary event, a grand opening or something like that? I mean, that's what temporary
Let's say
signs are
apartments for
typically
lease.
for.
Apartments for lease banner.
So retail signs, I mean, that's in that temporary, and that's one of the listed sort of occurrences of a temporary sign.
Is it about the sign, or is it about where the sign is located, and if the sign is...
It's about the sign and what the temporary event or temporary use event is that it's advertising. That's the intent of the...
So I just want to make sure an apartment building can have a banner that says for lease, apartments for lease on it, right? But it can only have it up for 6 months and then never put it up again, or?
It's intended to be at a time, like when something is happening. It's an imperfect system, I guess is the way I would describe it. We're trying to... I mean, these are the kinds of signs that are intended to be for grand openings and those kinds of things. We're proposing a longer time frame for 6 months out of gesture of goodwill for folks that need something like that. A real estate kind of event like what you're talking about, that there are apartments for lease. Well, if there are apartments for lease, then, they can certainly have a sign like that up. These are the kinds of signs that don't require permits. So they're exempt.
So
but we're trying to create
a little bit of regulation is better than no regulation.
Well, that's what we're trying to do, and be fair, but not be kind of draconian about it, I guess. It's not a great answer, sorry, but it's, enforcement's difficult on these things.
Yeah, I have a question, but it's more of a deliberation, so maybe.
Well, I mean, that's really what it boils down to, is that you could have different enforcement kind of looks at it, and somebody could be knocking on the door every 6 months saying, hey, you got to take down that sign. And then the question is, well, when can they put back up the sign? Tomorrow, right? So.
I mean, it's, if apartments are for lease, you're allowed to advertise for that.
Right.
That's okay. And that's, yeah. We are also, for the proposed language also is proposing to create an exemption for signs for historic properties, speaking of historic properties, and heritage trees. We're including some standards for the signs and some language about what would qualify as that kind of a historic property. Again, these are the kinds of, this type of sign would be exempt from needing to get a permit, as long as it's identifying a historic property and meets the general parameters for what that sign would be. And then finally, the proposed language requires that signs for businesses that have closed, that those signs need to be removed within 6 months. We're trying to reduce clutter as well as confusion when people see signs for businesses that have been closed for quite some time. So we're trying to clean that up.
Right, and that would be on the property owner or the property owner of that?
Correct, right,
Okay.
yeah. Ultimately, that's the contact information that we would have, so
Okay.
that's who we would be contacting for
Okay.
a code violation like that, yep. In Title 17, the Land Division Code, the amendments would clarify that a boundary change within an approved subdivision requires a subdivision replat. There's a table within Title 17, and it's just, we're adding a clarification so that people understand that if you're creating a boundary change within an approved subdivision that's been platted, that's a subdivision replat. We just want to make sure that the chart is clear as to what would be required under those circumstances. We're proposing.
So, I'm sorry, Vera. So
Yeah.
the change isn't really in content, but just in format
Exactly.
of this
yeah,
information?
we're-
Okay.
yeah, We're adding a phrase within that table. It's
Oh, I
saying
see, right.
It's saying the same thing.
Number
It's just,
4A.
but it's saying it
Okay.
again. Yeah. We've had some confusion with applicants, so we just wanted to make sure that folks were clear on that, yeah.
I have one really quick question before you move too far away
Yeah.
from it, is that in some cases we're using 6 months, and in some cases we're using 180 days. And I'm just wondering if there's a reason for, like in, removal of signs in violation. The first sentence is 180 days, and the second sentence is 6 months.
Oh, that should be the same. No.
I'm just looking for consistency.
Yes, no, that's a good catch. Thank you.
Thank
No,
you.
it should be. Yeah, the 180 days is in the existing. Yeah, no, I will make that amendment, that revision. Thank you for catching that. Okay. We're proposing some changes to Section 201, the definitions section. The first one is that we will clarify the definition of a public park to remove a reference to the City Community Services Department. That department does not exist, yet there it is in the definition, so we're proposing that we just clean that up and take it out.
While we're looking at that, I wonder,
Yeah.
it's a park within the city, which is controlled, operated, or managed by the city of Milwaukee. What about NCPRD or other agencies who could have a park? Should that be clarified? Or city of Milwaukee or other public agency, perhaps? I don't know. I think Milwaukee owns the land of all of the NCPRD
It does.
parks, but I
NCPRD
don't know if
manages
that's
them.
always going to
Yeah.
be the case.
Right. No, that's a good consideration.
And Metro can own parks.
True,
and
yeah.
Or the public. Okay.
Maybe just add the word ownership to the list.
Okay. Or ownership. Okay. No, good, thank you.
I'm not sure if that's implicit with the word control or not.
It might be. I was thinking more
Yeah.
along the lines of like adding of the city of Milwaukee or other public agency, but that might be too broad potentially, but just.
Yeah. I think we were originally, because it was the City of Milwaukee Community Services
Yeah.
Department, that was the city, so we were just taking that part out and just making it city, but I think you've identified something that, we may want to bring up with council as well and see what they want to say. Thank you. No, it's good. We are proposing some changes to the definition of livestock to make a distinction between livestock and pets. Yeah. I'm envisioning a lot of discussion here. But because later in the code, livestock is considered an agricultural use, whereas pets are not. And so pets are not regulated in that form in the residential district. So we're trying to make the clarification that livestock are domestic animals raised for things such as, and the additional language is meat, milk, shearing, they're intended to be used, for lack of a better term, as opposed to someone who has a couple of, miniature goats or whatever, as pets on their property. So and this came up because someone wanted to have a pet goat. And the way our code at the time was written, that was considered livestock, and that person could not have the goat because they didn't have a property large enough for livestock, even though that wasn't the purpose of the goat.
I'm still going to tell my daughter we can't have goats.
That's
the code. She wants one.
I won't challenge you on that, so that's fine. So that's the proposal, is just to clarify that, so we're making it clear that pets are more than just cats and dogs now.
So now, wait a second. So if I have 5 chickens and I sell my eggs, that means it's livestock because I'm using it for profit, right?
Well, the poultry is, if you're in one of the residential zones, poultry that's kept for the production of meat or commercial sale of eggs, they cannot be on a lot less than 1 acre. So, yeah. That's how the current code is written. We haven't changed any of that.
Okay.
The current code talks about commercial sale of eggs as actually being in the same grouping as agricultural or horticultural.
Oh, I see. So poultry does not fall within that agriculture. Okay.
Yeah.
That's fine.
You got to give your eggs away.
Yeah.
Can't sell them.
We are proposing some changes to the definition of live-work unit, and this coincides with the design standards for live-work units that we'll talk about later in Section 500. The current code essentially requires that these units are multi-story, like they are across the street here in Harrison Street. The proposed language would allow live-work units that are on a single floor. And so we just want to make sure that we wanted to provide some flexibility in the design of a live-work unit and make them less prescriptive. We are proposing a minor definition change in personal business services so that we can clarify that pet grooming and pet daycare services are considered in that umbrella of uses. This is something that codes do all the time, Well, pet grooming's not new, but it's new to the code. And so we've been interpreting it as a personal use, like a salon or something like that, but we wanted to make sure that the code was consistent with how we've been interpreting those uses. That's different from, a kennel or something like pet daycare is very different from that, and kennels are defined differently in the code. I just wanted that to be clear.
Well, I don't mean to linger this thing out, but what are children daycare?
Daycare has its own, they have their own definition, because they're state regulated.
Oh,
so that's
okay.
That's very different, yeah.
Okay.
And we add the proposed, the amendments also add a definition for the term adjacent, which is used in the code, but it's not defined. So we are, the amendments clarify the term abutting, because we use the terms abutting and adjacent, and I know this sounds incredibly wonky, and it is, but it's deliberate, because we want to make sure that it's distinct from the term adjacent, because there are sections of the code that would be considering those as separate things, and we want to make sure that it's clear in the code. We also have some changes in throughout 19.300, which are all the base zones that have to do with personal service-oriented businesses. That term is used it's written in a few different ways in the code, and we want to make it consistent that we're saying it the same way, and it's tied to the way we define it in the definitions. As code amendments happen, we're not always consistent with just the way we write things. They're either dashed or there's a slash, and we just want to make them consistent, so it's consistently named throughout the code. And then finally, back to the livestock and pets, we clarify the difference between livestock and animals as household pets on single-family properties. And we also added some language to require humane conditions and proper storage of animal food. I pulled that from the county code, but I thought, it's not super enforceable necessarily, but I think it's a nice reminder that people treat their animals humanely. Yeah. Okay. On to downtown. There's a few changes that we're proposing in the downtown mixed-use zone. A mathematical correction has been added to the to building height in the table of development standards. The lowest base maximum height is 45 feet, with a maximum of 2 stories. For height bonuses would be an additional 24 feet for a total of 69 feet. So the math is incorrect as it's represented in the table, and we're just making the math match the. It also corrects an inconsistency between that table of standards and figure 304-4, which is the height within the height standards within downtown. We are also proposing, so in the existing code, and you will probably remember this from the axle tree from the Guardian Development Project, the existing code has a requirement for a 6-foot step back for buildings that are above the base maximum. That is both a development standard within 304, but it's also a design standard in 508. That presents a procedural conflict for projects that are trying to, or that are proposing a design without the step back, which Axle Tree did propose, because it would require both a variance and going through the design review process. The proposed language eliminates it as a development standard, so the variance is not the route. If you were not going to be proposing the step back, you're going through the design review process. So if you're not going to be, it's being required as a design standard, not a development standard. So if you meet it, great, you're in the objective standards, you're meeting that standard. If you don't meet it, then you go through the design review process. But having a project have to go through both a variance that's dealing with very different kinds of approval criteria versus the design standard seemed very inconsistent in the code. And it seems more appropriate to treat it as a design standard rather than a development standard. And it keeps everybody on one path when they're going through that process. In the manufacturing zone, we are proposing to add personal vehicle repair as an allowed use. The manufacturing zone is now only along Johnson Creek Boulevard. That's the last remaining M manufacturing zone because of the NMIA process that we did. There isn't any more manufacturing zone left besides Johnson Creek. The manufacturing zone currently permits repair and service for fleet vehicles, tire retreading, heavy trucks, all of that kind of stuff, but not personal vehicles. So, for example, a Bernard's Garage would not be able to be located in the M zone. So we think at this point that use is only permitted by right in the downtown, in the general commercial zone, which is the Wichita Plaza at King and Linwood, and in the general mixed use zone, which is in central Milwaukee. So we don't have a lot of real estate opportunity for personal vehicle repair, and we think that the manufacturing zone along Johnson Creek Boulevard is an appropriate place for that kind of use. And given that we're already permitting repair and service of everything else, it's not inconsistent with the existing uses. Back to kind of circling back to the live-work units. We are proposing, again, that single-story live-work units are allowed, that they don't have to be multi-story live-work units.
So isn't the purpose of a live-work to have residents upstairs and a shop down below?
That is one model, but you could have a live-work that is all on the same floor, that you have an office, or you have an art studio or something like that, and your sleeping quarters and your living quarters are behind, as an example, that studio space. They don't have to be separated by floor.
Right.
They could be separated just via walls or use of the space.
Okay.
It seemed very prescriptive to require them to be multi-story,
Right.
so we wanted to add some flexibility to the way
I just
that they
always
were laid
remember
out.
all of our talk about live-work units was up above.
It's
and down
traditional
below.
to do it that way,
Okay.
but we're seeing a lot of mixed floors and live-work units that are within the same unit as
Okay.
well.
It's also it's more age-friendly, right? I mean, if you don't have to climb stairs. I mean, that's the way I was thinking of it,
That
too.
as well, yeah.
So.
And with the multifamily design standards, the language is proposing to remove the requirement for native trees to be planted on a multifamily development site within the list of design standards for the objective review process. What we're asking is that the change be that that the trees can't be the nuisance species, but we're not requiring native species. What we have found is that there can be difficulty in locating native species that can fit within the planting areas that, as far as we have perimeter buffering, we have buffers between properties that are required as part of that objective process. But if those planting areas, if you have a setback of 5 feet, as an example, to meet that code standard, that's fine. But there aren't the list of native trees that can survive in that narrow of a planting area, as an example, is not that long. And we want to make sure that people have some flexibility and be able to create the canopy that we want to see in the multifamily. So the non-nuisance species is what we're proposing as an alternative for the language.
Is the new tree ordinance going to, I mean, like the climate action plan talks about maybe native tree, but drought-resistant trees or whatever, right? And is the new tree ordinance going to come up with a new city list of trees? And so should this be one that maybe you hold on to? Because you might end up with something that says, well, required by the tree ordinance list, or...
What we would like then, though, is that there will be a list of nuisance species.
Okay.
And all our references is that it can't be a nuisance species. We're not creating a list for this. We're just saying what it can't be, and we'll make sure that we're consistent with the tree.
Right, I'm just making sure that the other lists don't pop up.
That's right. Yeah.
Which would not necessarily, which may not be on the nuisance tree list, but would be,
Okay.
15 different species. There, you can only plant 15 species.
We'll make sure that we work with the tree board to make sure that we're not conflicting with that.
Right.
But I'm hoping that if it's non-nuisance, that's as simple as it can be, and we won't do that. Yeah.
Speaking from experience, I would hate to see it be overly prescriptive. It's very prescriptive right now. It doesn't match other cities. It kind of pulls from one part of Portland and then kind of omits the part that says that you can plant non-native trees. So I would advocate really strongly to not include any type of list of trees.
I'm just saying that we have 2 documents out there that are going, one that's not finished yet that's going to totally reference trees, and one document that semi-references trees. So instead of...
I think it's fine to suggest. I don't think it's okay to prescribe what trees you can have and what trees you can't unless they're considered nuisance.
You might want to bring that up with the tree board.
Well, maybe.
Yeah. Okay. We're proposing some code language changes to the marijuana business standards, specifically that our current code has conflicting language with the building code, where we currently have, speaking of prescriptive, very prescriptive standards for, we actually specify activated carbon filters on exhaust outlets for odor control, and that's in conflict with the Oregon Building Code. We can't have specific mechanical systems specified in the code. So we've changed some language to make it more of a performance standard as opposed to an equipment standard. Green building standards, we've also highlighted this as a key question, but I'll summarize what we're proposing. We currently have green building standards as a height bonus standard in the downtown, the general mixed use zone, and the NMIA. And it's referenced in all 3 of those. So what we're proposing is that we create a section called green building standards, and we reference all of them to the one section. Otherwise, if things change, we're changing multiple sections of the code. So that's the first change. The second is that we are proposing new standards. Right now, the current code allows for a height bonus for any ANSI-approved green building system, with some examples like green globes, LEED, et cetera. There has been some discussion that that those standards aren't high enough, that we're allowing for a height bonus without a high enough standard, and we should be increasing that standard.
Vera, I have some concerns about that. LEED can get really expensive, And we oftentimes, in affordable housing, pick Earth Advantage. Path to Net Zero, we're trying out. But we do Earth Advantage pretty often, and I think we've done Green Globes before. And so when you're talking about affordable housing and possibly requiring LEED standard, I think that's, it could be an unreasonable expectation if you're dealing with affordable housing developers, and it could create more cost to the development. So I would caution against getting rid of Green Globes and Earth Advantage.
Okay.
Or advocate strongly not to do so.
Yeah, can you just add in a generic C that says, or other energy efficient or other green building documentators?
May I ask that we hold this to the key issues? Because we have some more, no, that's, and Commissioner Edge submitted comments about this as well, so if that's okay.
Sure.
We'll talk about it under the key
Okay.
issues, because we have a couple of things that we wanted to add since we've posted the staff
Okay.
report as well, so. And you're not the first to kind of express that there's some concerns, so but
Okay.
let's talk about under key issues, if that's okay. All right. Parking lot landscaping standards, we're proposing to change the planting standards. Trees would now be every 30 feet instead of every 40 feet. We want to create more canopy in the parking lot, so we're asking that we do that. In 708, we're proposing language that would change the standard for dead-end streets or a closed-end street system.
Sorry, Vera, can I ask one question?
Yeah.
Regarding parking lots, is this in private developments as well as?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Anything that would be subject to the parking lot design standards, yes, yeah. For dead-end streets, we're talking about cul-de-sacs and so on, that it would change the standard such that a cul-de-sac with no more than 20 units could be built off of a dead-end street. And I have an image to illustrate that. So Where Else Lane is considered a closed-end street system with more than 20 dwelling units. With this amendment, we could require an extension of Elsewhere and then allow cul-de-sacs on those large narrow lots that I've encircled in red. The current code would not permit additional development because it's considered a closed-end street system. And what we want to be able to do is to be able to require or be able to add what we might call infill development off of these closed-end street systems, so that we can redevelop and provide more density on some of these lots that otherwise would not be able to. Additional development would not be permitted otherwise on these properties. The code already requires connectivity, so we're not proposing cul-de-sacs everywhere. We still require connectivity, but we want to be able to provide more opportunity for redevelopment while also still balancing the connectivity requirements that we have as well in that same section of the code. So we would still be requiring both, but the current code right now would preclude any additional development here on this development because of Where Else Lane has more than 20 units on it. So we wouldn't be able to see any redevelopment on those properties. So we'd like to be able to open up those opportunities for those properties.
Can I just?
Yeah.
I just feel like I have to say something.
Sure.
There's a lot of trees there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the code necessarily. I guess just for like illustration purposes, when we talk about tree canopy and development, redevelopment, infill, I'm just like, oh boy, there's a lot of trees there. So those would potentially be taken away.
That would depend on what the tree code
What the tree code would
says.
say.
Yes.
Right.
And the tree board is working on tree preservation standards through development right now, so that they would be working in concert.
Got it.
now.
But
Yes.
if you wanted to maximize out your lots, yes, most of those trees would be gone.
Right.
Unless the tree code, the tree code language is likely some things to say about that as well. There would be standards for that as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So
There's also creek, Mount Scott Creek runs along the southern part.
Right, this is for illustrating.
Yeah, so I'm
It's a
just-
really obvious closed-end street system with
Yeah.
big lots.
I'm just mentioning that for the context that there's other layers
Of course, yes.
land use regulations that would, push, it would serve to push that development to one side, and so you'd hopefully be saving some of that tree canopy. But I'm concerned about connectivity between these closed-in systems and pedestrian connectivity and everything. And, it's like you see these quarter-mile long dead-end streets that are within 100 feet of each other, and
A better example would have been to show the Rusk Road site, Turning Point Church site that we all were familiar with the that subdivision that was proposed there. Kellogg Drive is a dead end. So the way that street, that development needed to take access off of Kellogg Drive, they proposed, I can't remember how many units it was, but it was a lot more than 20. And the way we got by that on that one was we basically interpreted the code to say this development can't do more than 20 dwellings on a cul-de-sac. And they looped their street system or connected it back. No, they ended up asking for a variance in the end, I think. But different iterations of that had a loop street off of Kellogg Drive. But actually, the cul-de-sac starts at Kellogg Drive, or the in that case.
Right.
And that had a whole park off of it as well. So, what the intent of this code amendment was to say, we've got these situations in this community that cause a great deal of difficulty to get around because of this standard that we've got. And the idea being that off of any one particular cul-de-sac, yeah, you can only have 20 lots, but we have these street systems that cannot physically connect to anything without demoing something, crossing a creek, doing something else, where there's quite a bit of land that can't be developed without a variance. So this was trying to clean that up.
Right. In Section 904, wireless communications facilities, there are a variety of code amendments clarifying the permitting process, including a list of exemptions reflecting a ruling by the FCC. We also add references to Title 21, alerting applicants to other city code requirements, and we worked with our right-of-way and contracts coordinator to insert specific references in there to make sure that we were being consistent and reminding folks of her section of the code as well. And we're proposing to add some standards for vacation rentals, reflecting a recent decision by the Planning Commission, so that we had those standards for vacation rentals as well.
I'm sorry, real quick, for the wireless, does this include all that 5G stuff?
Oh, the micro?
Yeah.
It does not. That's where,
You're waiting until...
I'm going to
all
wait
right.
for Reba to help me figure out and see where that lands when
Okay.
she gets through her stuff, yeah.
All right.
For ADUs, Senate Bill 1051 has a requirement that one accessory dwelling unit be permitted per single-family home. Our language in our code just says per lot, so we wanted to make sure that we don't have a lot of occasion to have a couple of single-family homes on a lot, but just in case, we want to make sure that we are consistent with the Senate bill. The building height variance, we are clarifying that a building height variance is permitted. The language is not clear, and we want to make sure that it is clear that if a proposal downtown, for example, wanted to build a 5-story building and not build a green building and not include housing, which are the two of the height bonuses that are permitted by right, that there is a height variance route, which is not clear in the code. That is intended, but it's not clear. It's obviously a very high hurdle to get over if you wanted to build a 5-story office building, for example, that was not green, but we wanted to make sure that it was clear that that is an option as well.
But wasn't that, Are you doing that because state law makes you do that? Or wasn't that height bonus designed by purpose for the simple fact of to get housing in green building?
I mean, we were incentivizing those.
Right, so I don't,
Yes.
I think that was done by purpose to incentivize that, so why would we give a variance option?
Right.
Is it required somewhere that if you do that?
It's not required, but the language right now seems to imply it, but it's not clear. And that's-
My personal option would be is that you don't allow a variance for a height bonus.
Okay, that the only way to get there is through the bonuses.
Right,
Okay.
through the incentives. That would be my preference, I mean.
We can deliberate on this probably.
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot that we're actually in.
Sorry. I'm trying to talk as fast as I can.
No, it's-
We are proposing language relating to the notification to Metro for a variety of our land use applications. They changed their date to 35 days. We still say 45 days. We want it to be the same. And we are including references in various subsections within our review procedures to our ORS 197.311, which addresses new requirements for projects that qualify as affordable housing projects, that the timeframe for review is 100 days, not 120, which is our standard for land use applications. So that reference is throughout Section 1000. Wherever we were talking about 120 days, we've made a reference to the 100-day rule. Okay. So the key issue for green building standards, again, creating a new section in the code. Second is that we are proposing to revise the standards to qualify for the bonus. Again, the language has been criticized by some that we don't go far enough in providing for the bonus. Again, in the code, a story of bonus is permitted for residential uses. So if the base maximum is 3 stories, you can go to 4 stories just by providing residential uses. But if you wanted to go to that 5th story, for example, downtown, a green building is the way you get there. The challenge in proposing new standards, and we're trying to balance several objectives. Obviously, energy efficiency and green building is one, affordable housing is another. Staff is another part of what we're trying to balance here by using a certification option. We've looked at other standards. California has a really fantastic standard, but it's performance-based, performance measures, and trying to figure out how to evaluate those projects, both from a land use application standpoint, but then also on a review aspect. How are we able to make sure that they are in fact meeting those performance standards and through the documentation? So using a certification program is a way to get there. Commissioner Edge submitted some comments, and they were good ones. And I think what we're looking to do is to create a longer list of options, is one way that we're thinking about it. Right now, we're proposing, or the current language that we're proposing is LEED Silver, and we would add or better, so that we're within. We don't want to disallow someone from doing LEED Platinum, obviously, that's a good thing, so that was a good point. But there are also other programs out there, right? Passive House, Living Building Challenge. We met with a developer to kind of get a sense of what does that side of the house think of these things, and more options are better. So what we're trying to figure out is that list. What are the programs that we ought to have as the options to be able to achieve the height bonus.
I would like to note that on the 9% tax credit application, which is what a lot of affordable housing developers use to fund programs, and Kim probably can attest to this, you can choose from Earth Advantage, I think, or Green. I think you have the option to choose from Earth Advantage, Green Globes, and maybe LEED. So OHCS gives you some options.
But is it, I'm sorry, through the chair, any level, or are there specific levels of?
No, you can just,
so.
In order to get tax credits, you
Just
choose
use
one
the
of
program.
them. Yeah, you have to
Okay.
be green. You can choose one of them. I think those are the 3. Are those the 3?
The issue
Yeah.
that came up here during the project for Axle Tree project, the Bernard's Garage site, as they were attempting to get vertical housing tax credits, or that project was being made eligible for vertical housing tax credits, there was concern that the Green Globes program didn't do enough in terms of energy conservation. So it does some things related to green building techniques, but not enough towards energy conservation. So the mayor in particular wanted to crank up the energy conservation element. And that whole discussion came up also when we were looking at the North Milwaukee Innovation Area. And so we sort of deferred a decision on that point to get to build the list of programs here. So this is intended to sort of set the model for what green building programs would be in Milwaukee. And it starts with the downtown. It would also apply to North Milwaukee. But I know in particular that if we, at the council level at least, if we keep Green Globes in, or Earth Advantage in, we might want to also add a component to require that energy, what's the word I'm looking for? The energy model, the energy measurements for a building be higher than the current building code.
Right.
So, and that was something that came out of this discussion the other day, actually. But we're not sure what the right number might be.
Yeah, it just concerns me when we're so, or we're saying we're, really advocating for affordable housing, and it's so expensive right now. And maybe, Guardian as a market rate developer with the Axle Tree has more, maybe they have more money in that line item. But, I understand what you're saying, what the mayor is concerned about, but I also know that it can add a lot of cost to the project.
But it
I
doesn't.
think you need to make that point really strongly, either as a recommendation tonight or as a, outside comment or somehow, but I mean, I think that's.
I mean, I can tell you that we pursue every avenue that we can to build as sustainable as we can, and we're doing the path to net zero on our office building, but Earth Advantage on our housing, because that was the most cost-effective way to go.
Right, on your office, but on your regular housing. When you say
Housing, it's Earth Advantage.
when you say housing, you're talking about a two-story large residential multifamily, right?
I'm talking about our 3 residential buildings, our 28 units of affordable housing on our campus site.
Right, two-story. They're not a vertical.
3-story.
They're not a vertical 5-story typical block.
They're
building.
not, but if we had the option for a height bonus, if we were building downtown, the more units you can build, the easier it is to make a deal pencil, obviously.
Right. No, I get that.
So, if we had the option to use Earth Advantage to build more units, to go higher, I think we would have taken that. We're not downtown. We're not considered downtown, so.
Right. No, I get it.
3 stories was hard enough to get.
Right.
That's why it's a key issue. That's why we phrased this as, is this the right approach? Are we?
I wonder about, rather than enumerating the standards in code, if you could do something like have the city manager or the sustainability director would be responsible for maintaining a list of approved standards, and the code would refer to an external list maintained
Or
by
you
a
just make it a
designee.
type 2 decision that the planning director gets to decide what is worthy and what isn't.
That's really subjective. I mean,
Yeah.
for the developer, I don't think that's a good.
I think.
I mean, right now it might be good, but in
Are we in
5 or 10 years it
deliberation?
might not be.
No, we're not.
Question. I don't think so.
we can deliberate.
Yeah. Just wanted to note that I received 3 questions regarding the Measure 56 notice, and people just wanted to clarify that the green building piece doesn't affect them unless they want the height bonus, which is true. And that was it. So out of all of those hundreds of letters, I got 3 calls. We ask that you recommend approval to City Council, obviously with whatever concerns and questions that you may have. You already know what your decision-making options are. That the recommendation is to City Council, and right now we're tentatively scheduled to be before them December 18th for this. So, but I will maybe keep this at the key issue unless you have other questions.
Does anybody have
before
any
we start.
questions for Vera before we deliberate?
I think we gotta hear from our patient audience member here. No.
I don't have any cards for
No cards.
testimony, so.
You're just here to hang out? Wow, he's it.
Did you say 12:16 for the city council meeting?
The 18th.
12:18?
Yep.
Okay.
Well, maybe we'll fix it here.
Okay, no clarifying questions for Vera, then, and we've only received 3 correspondence.
Oh, wait, what is Measure 56?
Measure 56 is a requirement that if a land use code change is going to affect a property owner's use of their property negatively, like limit their use or add additional constraints to the use of their property, that you have to notify them directly. So we did a direct mail notifying all the property owners that would have been affected by the height bonus green building standard of the change.
Okay,
So, yeah.
thank you.
Okay, and we have no testimony to hear, and so we're going to go ahead, and the public testimony portion of this hearing on file ZA-2018-004 is now closed. Is the commission ready for discussion?
Yes.
Yes.
So I think that we have a couple of clarifying pieces that I've, just minor things, right? The consistency with the 180 days and 6 months piece. The public park piece, clarifying if that includes public ownership. And then there was one other thing. Let's go to the comment from Commissioner Hemer.
My height variance?
Yes, 19.911.
Yeah, so,
Point 6, building height variance in the downtown mixed-use zone. Right? That's on page 20 of 24. Yes. The type 3 building height variance is an option for proposed buildings that exceed the base minimum building heights or stories and allowed height through bonuses specified in
20. 20. So.
or do not elect to use the height bonuses in subsection 19.304. It's on page 20, and it's under variances.
I think Commissioner Hemer's comment was that as with this clarification, or as code is written, you can get the 4th and the 5th story automatically if you have residential and you meet the green building standard, but you could also roll the dice and see if we would approve a variance to get that 4th or 5th or other height bonus, and do we want to reserve that to only an incentives based?
Yeah, my argument is that it's there as an incentive piece. It should not be there as a variance piece.
So maybe a potential counterpoint is why not let someone request a variance if they're coming in and saying, well, it's not green, but it's affordable, and I can show you that it's affordable. And
But there's a housing element to it.
that gets you to 4, but what if you want to get to 5 and you're going to say, I can't afford to be green?
Because the design standard is 3.
But there's a variance, and that's allowed.
No. There's an incentive to build a green building.
This
and
isn't
to add housing
introducing. This isn't introducing a new variance. This is clarifying that the variance already exists.
Right, I'm saying that it shouldn't exist.
And I'm presenting a case where it might be a good thing to allow that variance.
Different variance criteria, and it's difficult to meet. This was special variance criteria that was written when we built this section of the code. I think it happened at the council level. I don't think it happened at the planning commission. And it was a variance to either allow you to bypass these 2 requirements to get height, or to go over 5 stories. And I don't know if you were pulling up those criteria right there.
I have them right here.
You want to just try to summarize real quick?
Yes, so we have a special section within the variance section of the code for building height variances in the downtown. So it has its own variance just for downtown building height variances. The review process allows for the DLC and the planning commission to hire an architect to work with you to help evaluate a proposal, for an example. And the approval criteria requires consistency with the downtown design guidelines, that the height variance will result in a project that is exceptional in the quality of detailing, appearance, views, open space, a positive, unique relationship to other buildings, et cetera, that the height variance preserves important views to the Willamette River, and limits shadowing on public open spaces, and that the height variance will result in a project that provides public benefits and/or amenities beyond those required by the base zone standards. So it's not your regular run-of-the-mill mitigating impacts kind of variance. These are really specific to downtown, exceptional design, public benefits. It's a really high bar to be able to get there.
I'd love to see a proposal that meets that bar. I think that would be a great hearing, and I encourage folks to propose it.
Yeah, the language reminds me of the planned development language to get the density bonus. You need, exceptional design and outstanding, amenities, and, it's a very high bar to clear. The idea being, and whether it was the special variance or even just a routine variance, the idea of a variance is that you might be bending one of the rules, but the end result is something that is more consistent with the policies of the comp plan, the policies of the zone and, of the intended land uses than what they would be able to do without the variance. You know what I mean? And so, the idea is you still end up with something that belongs there and it meets policies, of the city, of the comp plan, but maybe just doesn't follow the exact prescribed letter in order to get there. And so with that, I feel comfortable, with a variance process. I mean, they have they're rolling the dice. They have the opportunity to sell us on how exceptional this is and how, and the comp plan policies are implemented through the downtown design guidelines. And so, in that sense, how are you meeting the downtown design guidelines in a way that, is exceptional and beyond what is required by the base zone, and so you have this the idea is you end up with this really exceptional product, and it's at our discretion, ultimately,
So let me ask you this. Why have incentives when you have a variance?
Because that's the preferred path. That's the path of least resistance. It offers more certainty to the investor. Or to the developer, they know that, all I have to do is get LEED silver, or whatever. I have to get this many leaves on the living and the living building challenge, or whatever to I have to meet this objective criteria in order to get my height bonus, versus I have to meet this discretionary criteria to get my height bonus. So it's a path of certainty, which we know will meet policies that we think are important, versus a different, discretionary way of meeting our policies.
Do you want to read 19.911, the whole thing? Okay. I see that you're stuck on this.
No. I just don't like the concept. No matter how eloquently it has been explained by planning staff and by Commissioner Edge.
Right.
It
I
just,
see.
it just makes absolutely no sense to me.
Okay.
Because all you need is the variance, and then you can accept housing and green building as two of those standards. So why don't you just put that in the variance and forget the incentive for the height bonus?
It's another option. Why?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a standards-based option versus a discretionary.
I got it.
And so, you don't know that coming in here that we're going to agree that what you're proposing is actually exceptional and actually surpasses what's required in the base zone.
Oh, and I get, so if we were to take Axle Tree, and if it wasn't for the design differences that they had, that if they met the green building and they met the housing element, that would be a type 2, that they don't have to do a type 3.
It was a by right development, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but they needed a variance, through the chair, that they needed a variance for the step back.
Right. But if they met all design,
That wasn't this criteria, but that's why they were
right, if they
in
met
here.
all design standards, they would
wouldn't be
automatically,
here.
it's a type 2. This variance is type 3.
That's right. Yeah.
Could you go above 5 stories through the, you could have a 6-story building through this variance, and that's another reason to keep this if you ever thought an exceptional building could be even taller.
To make a really compelling argument, but yeah, I encourage somebody
Well, your
to
compelling
come to
argument
us.
would, right, the cash spot is a perfect example of, well, if everything around you is 5 stories and you're 3 stories below, you should be able to go up 8 stories, right?
Whose view are you blocking? Yeah, right. Is there a compelling
Well, you're
policy?
blocking somebody's view.
Well, is there a compelling policy reason to allow someone to build higher there than what the code allows? And if they want to roll the dice and have a discretionary review and the opportunity to make a case that this fulfills all of these policy objectives that we have for downtown, it just happens to be taller than what, is allowed by right.
And it seems like it would allow some of the cases that, Commissioner Grau's talking about for affordable housing that's coming through an alternate green standard, green energy standard, for us to consider it and hear that it's, it's cheaper and just as good.
Right, you could do the variance one, and you can say, oh, we use green globes because of this, and this.
Yeah.
Right, and I'd like to hear Commissioner Grau's comments on this as well, and what a variance pathway in order to get, the 5th story instead of, in conjunction with green globes versus having green globes enumerated as one of the standard or by right means of getting that additional story. How do you feel about applying for a variance and saying, look, it's affordable housing and we're doing green globes, we're getting, this meets policy objectives? How's that path for you?
I think as a developer, you always want to not have to do that.
That's fair.
So if Green Globes or Earth Advantage was just listed as an acceptable green building standard, I think that would be the preference. However, we're not opposed to requesting a variance, but I think the easier we can make it on developers, and I completely understand the climate action initiative, and I understand the need for higher standards, but I would caution against making that too prescriptive and essentially, scaring away anybody who would want to develop affordable housing in downtown Milwaukee, because, we're requiring LEED, which is very expensive. So, yeah, I don't think my view on that has changed at all. Not that, developers apply for variances all the time, but the easier we can make it to develop affordable housing, I think, is the most important thing.
So when you're looking at a timeline for a development project and you're thinking about, I can either do LEED Silver, which is expensive, or I can do Green Globes and a variance process.
I think it really comes down to how much it costs the project. So if it's gonna, produce an unreasonable time frame, construction costs are not going down, that might be something that we look at. It just really boils down to what it will cost the project and whether it will pencil or not, and how much our time is worth, I guess, to pursue the variance.
How much, I mean, how much time will that, or how much effort do we have to put into it? Does that also say, well, you know what, that's a lot of effort that we got to put into it, into downtown Milwaukee, so we'll go into downtown Molalla instead? That doesn't have that? Does that option come in, or do you pick a location first?
No, I mean, I think you obviously pick a location first. I mean, you kind of have your eye on a site. It really depends on what the community needs a lot of the time. I don't think if we were looking at a site in downtown Milwaukee and it, at first blush, it didn't pencil, we would just move on. I mean, that's not really how that works.
You would find extra funding, or you would find...
Well, I mean, yeah, you do whatever you can to find what you can to fund the project.
So I want to, so with this new bond measure passing and, right, does that mean, I guess what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to resolve the issue of the money of a higher standard than the money of what somebody would call a lower standard. So if LEED Silver is really expensive, do you think that you guys would be able to find a funding or a specific grant or specific funding to be able to cover the cost of that?
I don't know.
Have you ever tried?
Well, yeah.
And
we have
mixed results?
Yeah, I mean, just because the bond passed doesn't mean that we can spend more money on a project.
Right. Well, or there's more money available.
Just to try and get through the list of comments we had in Veer's presentation, I want to clarify, Greg, are you okay with moving on from talking about 19.911.6, the variance?
Yeah,
I feel like we're on.
Yeah, we're on the green building
Moved on to
thing.
the
But you know what? It kind of
right?
ties together, because I think Commissioner Edge makes a very good point, is that, hey, you can leave these strict green building things in because you have a variance path to still get to your 5 or 6 buildings.
It's still going to cost extra money to apply for the variance and go through all the land use stuff that goes along with that.
I get that, but it has, your argument is, which I don't think is a bad argument, is that it costs too much money.
When there are other programs out there that are similar or almost identical to LEED that produce the same kind of results, I don't think LEED is really necessary.
But LEED Silver is probably more, I shouldn't say certainly, is probably more stringent than what Earth Advantage is.
I think they're pretty comparable.
So, I mean, my take is...
I don't know much about Green Globes, but I do know that
Yeah, I've only heard, a lot of critique about Green Globes from, from within the city.
Can't say that I feel like we maybe have used Green Globes, but I can't say for certain.
Yeah.
It would have been before my time, but I do know that we use Earth Advantage, and I would at least advocate that remain on the list.
So, I mean, what I'm trying to do is I'd like to reconcile, having a higher bar as the standards, the type 2 pathway, and then having, obviously a variance pathway, I feel very strongly is a smart way to go. But I want to solve this from an affordable housing viewpoint, because I want as much affordable housing as we can possibly get. And the green building standards, I think, in a lot of cases, are secondary, or the policies for green building are secondary to policies to get more housing that people can afford to live in. And so, I want to figure out how does the city, for office uses and for, regular for-profit uses, and market rate housing, type of uses, have the higher bar. But then when it's affordable housing, or there's a certain amount of affordable housing included, do we then have a lower bar to get the height standard or the height?
I wondered that too, if we have an affordable housing track.
Yeah.
That would include Earth Advantage and not just, we have experience with the Living Building Challenge, which we're doing on our office, as well as the Path to Net Zero.
Awesome.
And so it can be done. I just don't want to be overly prescriptive and where we don't need to be.
Right.
And we need to then define what level of housing affordability are we plugging in, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good option.
Yeah.
And that might be more than housekeeping, I think.
Well, we're a little on the heavy housekeeping here on this stuff.
The deep clean.
But it's
All right, but so
This is a recommendation to City Council, and City Council feels very strongly about housing right now and everything. I think that this is a good opportunity to at least recommend some scenarios, some language, give some advice, something.
So are you suggesting that we make housing gives you a floor bonus, and then you can say either green building or affordable housing gives you another floor bonus?
Oh, I'd like that.
That works for me.
All you have to do is provide the affordable housing. You don't even, the Green Globes could get you another floor. I want to give affordable housing as many floors as they're willing to build.
Right. So is there a definition of I've heard affordable housing called all 900 different ways. So.
I would not advocate for affordable housing without some sort of green, sustainable component, because it can be done, and I know it can.
So say affordable housing.
You just don't want to build something that's not sustainable. So I wouldn't say affordable housing or a green component, but I would maybe advocate for, if it's an affordable project as opposed to a market rate project or an office commercial project, to be a little bit more lenient in the green building standards.
Well, that's an interesting way to look at it. Can you write something like that?
Well, it could be a secondary list, a second tier or whatever of certifications that, when paired with affordable housing,
Right, but
at least 20% or 40% of the units are affordable housing, something like that.
So what happens if affordable housing doesn't necessarily mean that I am a nonprofit building housing?
No.
Right?
Right.
So I could be a commercial.
Yeah.
And I could say, I'm going to put in affordable housing units, the 10% or whatever the county requires, and then doesn't do it.
right.
Well, there has to be a penalty of some sort.
Right. I was going to bring this up at the end of deliberations, that I think that we need to look at our penalties for not following variances, but
Well, one would,
conditions and findings.
if it's a condition of the project and you fall out of that, you're essentially in violation of the code. You could be cited as not meeting code requirements.
Would substantial completion or TCO be not issued due to the fact that their rents were not at a certain percentage of area median income?
You would never know that until the building was
No, I
occupied.
don't think that'd be
I'm pretty sure.
really difficult, because you're finalizing the building before that.
That's true. I just wonder how you would enforce that.
You'd be fining the property owner for violation of the code requirements.
Would it be like a one-time fine, or would it be like,
It
hey,
goes
we're
into the
fining you
deed.
every day until you lower your rents?
Yeah.
Right, and it would, I mean, it's like it goes in
Like
your.
an absurd amount
It goes in
every
your,
day.
it goes in your deed that you're providing, that
Deed
you're.
restriction.
Yeah, and you're providing, 20% of the units are guaranteed affordable to 60% MFI or, whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever the standard is, and these are normal, easy standards that we can model on from other cities. But you're guaranteeing that for 20 years, 40 years, 60 years, forever, whatever it is, that the city decides to set as the standard, you're guaranteeing that, and that's going into it's going on your tax roll. I mean, it's you're committed to it.
So
Can the city require a deed restriction on private developers that aren't?
Not to this point.
Yeah, I don't-
mean, the only way we've got it was through they use the vertical housing tax credit. No, is that right? Is that for affordable, though?
It can be, but it doesn't have to.
It doesn't have to.
I'm going to
But I thought
suggest
they
that
did some things on the North Main project.
we do not vote to extend this meeting past 10. I won't vote for that. So let's
Okay, well,
find a way to get to the end here.
we finished discussion on 19.11. So now we're just tackling the key issue, and it sounds as though we're trying to provide a recommendation to council around our feeling to support more affordable housing development, and we're not exactly clear of how to do that, whether it's by a unit percentage or something.
We don't want to try and set the numbers.
We don't want to try to set the numbers tonight.
Yeah, we don't need to, but our guidance to the city should be to council, should be to explore how to implement something like this so that we can make it easier to get affordable units without needing to clear such a high bar to get, the same bonus that market rate units.
So what I would be comfortable with is adopting it the way that it is written. And then, because we still have the variance standard, and then sending a recommendation to council along with this package that, hey, maybe you should look at affordable housing as a bonus height, or to lower the green building standard for a project that is affordable housing.
I think we could go a little stronger than saying recommend adopting it as is, but to say we recommend creating a second tier of green building standards where it meets an applicable affordable housing standard to be developed.
Yeah, I'm not adopting that as is.
Yeah.
I'll be a no on that.
So if we changed it as we talked about, to say with
Yeah.
a second tier of standards that meet a criteria for affordable housing, and that criteria is to be developed, that's our recommendation. Is that?
I'm comfortable with that.
I
yeah.
am too.
We can bring whatever we come up with related to that to you at your meeting the week before the council would hold the hearing?
Then the 27th?
No, that doesn't work. Council was at the 18th, and December 11th is totally booked on other things. We can't do that, I'm sorry.
The 27th.
But what about the 27th?
Is that too soon?
That would, yeah, we could come with whatever we've got
Something.
on the 27th.
Okay.
But I guess what I'm suggesting is go ahead and do what you were doing, and we will follow up on that narrower element.
So pass what we have in front of us and then?
Yeah, I mean, with the changes you were just talking about, that
Oh,
Henry
okay.
was just talking about, but we can come back with kind of how our first cut at trying to craft that
Okay.
language.
And so what, I don't know if the city already has a code of affordable housing, but I would like a standard or a definition.
That's what we'll ask for.
No, I'm just saying, we're at the next meeting, a standard of or a definition of what it
would make
is.
sense to apply for this? We can do
Right,
that.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Okay, then. All right. So I think we got it, then. Vera was writing it
Furiously.
down. So is there anything else? I think that covered all of the things we highlighted during Vera's presentation.
Did we want to ask that they enumerate living building challenge as one of the options?
Yeah, I think anything from International Living Future Institute, Earth Advantage, Green Globes, I don't care if they don't,
Okay.
I feel pretty strongly about ILFI and Earth Advantage.
Okay.
Yeah, Living Futures
Being
is an
included,
awesome.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, then I will entertain a motion.
I motion that we present the recommendations for ZA 2018-004 to City Council with the, as presented with the modification to 19.510 to include a second tier of green building standards for unit developments that meet a to-be-presented standard for affordable housing and meet a second tier of green building standards, including Earth Advantage and ILFI.
Because I got one.
Second.
And then the other thing is the thing that Kim.
I just want to make sure that ILFI doesn't need to be a lower tier standard. It's a higher tier standard, right?
Yeah.
An alternate set of standards.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very good.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passed. Okay.
A lot, you must be tired.
This decision is a recommendation to the City Council, which will make the final decision after a public hearing. Please see planning staff for details concerning the City Council hearing date and process. Okay, so with that, we have already done our work session, other business updates.
Well, while I was gone, I was desperately trying to log on to a different computer and print out 4 of those consent forms. Maybe I only need 3, I can't remember. If one of you guys
I've sent mine in.
you've sent yours in, and Sherry just handed me one, so I was going to get the 3 consent forms for the 3 of you, but I totally failed. It wouldn't pull up my Outlook. So I've just asked Vera to try to do the same thing. This computer will print in the other room. So if we could just hold on for a minute or two, we might have 3 consent forms.
Well, are there any committee updates and discussion items?
Do you want to talk about your flyer?
I'm missing the DLC meeting where they're talking about the downtown design review rewrite right now.
I got a feeling they didn't spend a whole lot of time. I mean, I think what they probably did was recap what they'd worked on last week, because we had a meeting today about that. It was about pedestrian connections.
Yeah.
So if you were at that meeting, it was the big policy question in there in the guidelines today is about basically mid-block connections in the guidelines and the standards. I don't remember how much that was in the current standards or if it's just in the guidelines, but it calls for a mid-block connection when your street frontage is more than 200 feet. So if you had a full block of street frontage, it would be requiring a connection through the middle of the block to the like the parking area behind or something.
It's from the multifamily standard, so it's not just in the context of downtown's 200 square foot.
So I think it's an interesting policy question to discuss when it comes back to us, but that's what I think they were talking about today. This is part of the problem I had. It just took forever to load.
What happens if we don't sign those things today?
Nothing.
Okay.
We can skip
Sign it next time.
You have to stick around for a minute because you have another print job.
I'll be fine either way.
But I guess we could release everybody else and I could make sure I get you guys next time.
Thank you.
Any other discussion items? Quickly? We good? Okay. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Oh, a quick question about the future meetings forecast. Mm-hmm. I will not be available on November 27th, and so would you be willing to send materials for that meeting as early as humanly possible so that I can get responses back by email?
We will.
Excellent, thank you.
Probably as early as humanly possible will probably be next Tuesday.
Yeah, I know.
So, sorry.
It's all right.
But, but, it might be earlier. We'll see.
Thank you.
There might be, are you okay
It'll be
with
as
getting
early as
it
superhumanly
in
possible
pieces?
if you're on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't need it all at once. Just I'd like. We're talking about interesting things next time, and I'm going to miss it, and I'd like to.
The Greenway stuff is really close to being ready to go, and I'm not so sure about the other 3 elements.
Okay.
So,
Cool.
okay.
Thank you.
All right,
Okay.
we look closer here, but now we got to get Outlook open.
Yeah.
I had to, did the, I had just-
Your motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting's adjourned.